Hello everyone, welcome to Twilight. If you have anything to say related to the video or notice any issues, let us know in the comments. For now, enjoy the video. What if Bella was a purebred shapeshifter? My name is Isabella Marie Swan and I am a shapeshifter. I have a heartbeat and blood runs through my veins. I can change into anyone, anything, as long as it is a living thing, and I have to know about its background first before I change into anything. You may know the wolf shifters. They are my cousins. They can live forever and I can live forever too. So I am 199 years old. Thought I still looked like a 21-year-old. The day I was changed. I was changed on my birthday. I was human. I could grow, get old, not that I wanted to, live a normal life. But apparently I was never normal. Shapeshifters have their gift in their blood. It's born with us and gets triggered between your 18 to 28 ages in life. My gift was triggered at my 21st birthday. I had an okay family. They weren't the perfect ones because I was adopted by them since I'd been 5 years old. I had moved out of the small house we lived in and opened my eyes to the big world. My adopted brother used to say, "Med," and he's 23. He always used to say that when we were in the garden, looking at the stars through his father's telescope. My first experience of shape-shifting was a scary one. I was in my new flat that I bought with my college money and I was down to the ground floor, the flat's small garden. I was planting my space of flowers with the annoying little 5-year-old boy. I was paid to babysit for his mother, Simon, running circles around me. "Look, Bella, look." Simon squealed delightfully. I looked up quickly to see him running up to me, his hands full of my flowers I planted. I jumped up and took the flowers from him gently. My strength is much more than a human, so I have to be gentle with them. "No, Simon. These are my flowers." I scolded him. I didn't like being too harsh on children. I was too much of a softie, but this child took my flowers I planted a minute ago. I replanted the flowers calmly and turned to Simon. "Simon, go. Play somewhere else," I suggested, waving my hand in a random direction. "Okay, Bella." He laughed and ran off, jumping up and down joyfully. I sighed. Simon always seemed to take strict comments as it was clean air. It was just amusing to him. A few minutes later, a very muddy Simon bounced up to me again, but with a bucket full of dead plants in his toy wheelbarrow. The troublemakers above my head in their rooms roared out in laughter as I shook in fury. Simon's hair, clothes, trainers, nearly every part of him was painted with mud and dead flower parts. My flowers. I felt a strange, faint tingly feeling from my head to the tips of my toes. It was like getting an electric shock in my veins, a harmful spark traveling through with the blood, getting stronger. I jumped up when Simone lost control of the wheelbarrow and it tumbled into my newly done flowers I bought from B&M. Q. The spark doubled and flared. It felt like a very painful pins and needles covering every part of my body. Then I changed. 1 minute there was silence, then there was screaming coming from the floors above me. Simon backed away from me. His eyes were as huge as saucers. He looked afraid. I didn't know what was happening. I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what I was right now because I was obviously not Bella right now. The screaming proved that. Just then I saw a black-coated figure standing at the end of the small garden. It wasn't moving. But I was sure that that black thing was there the whole time, watching me. I thought that it was just an object, not that I looked at it properly, just an object blending into the backgrounds, the surroundings around it. I examined it closely now. It had a hood, and it definitely was a person, just so slightly I would have missed it. A faint glow of crimson color shimmered from inside the dark hood. It gave me the creeps. I stopped staring and looked back down to Simon, who was whimpering behind his damaged wheelbarrow. "Bella?" he asked. He sounded so scared I had the urge to comfort the poor little soul. I took a step towards him, noticing that I was walking on 4 limbs, and tried to speak. But to my utter amazement a low growl slipped from my sharp teeth. Simon wailed, "Please don't eat me." He cried out. He dipped his head near the barrel. His head banged the wheel hard and he cried out in pain. Blood wheezed from his wound in his head and he screamed out for Mummy. A higher scream responded and his mother Maria came rushing towards him from her car. "Baby." She sounded so frightened and scared I took a step back to show that I wouldn't hurt her. but I ended up stepping back onto the flower beds. I roared furiously, baring my teeth and swearing at myself for being so careless. Maria held Simon securely to her chest and backed away, more like running, away from me. Simon ducked his head to her shoulder and wailed. Behind me the dark figure moved. Simon's POV. I got really messy in the flower beds Bella showed me to play in. It was so fun. I got to pick flowers for Mummy and put them in my wheelbarrow. I went back to Bella to show her what I'd done, but I didn't think she liked it very much. The boys in the flat above me laughed very much. They must have loved it too. I tried to jump and clap but I stumbled and fell. My wheelbarrow wheeled into Bella's pretty flowers. Oopsie. I watched Bella's nice flowers get crushed. I looked to Bella and I saw a huge lion where Bella was. I saw those pictures of lions in Mummy's big book of wildlife. They scared me silly. I knew that they ate people, so the naughty lion must have eaten Bella. Bella? I asked desperately. She can't not die. I thought crazily. This lion was so scary and bigger than the ones in the book. I trembled when I saw its teeth. Big and sharp, more like razor knives the boys had sometimes. Suddenly the naughty lion growled at me, its huge brown eyes, like Bella's, looking at me like it wanted to eat me. It took a step towards me and growled hungrily. I begged for the lion not to eat me and I cried for Mummy, hiding behind my barrel. I hid my head from the lion, but I ended up hurting my head from the sharp wheels. I could feel the cut go deep into me. Mew. I sighed in relief when I heard Mummy's voice call my name. Baby. She hugged me tightly and whispered in my ear, "Where's Bella?" She asked me. I didn't respond. I wailed from the shock and the pain I felt. My worries doubled and I shook violently when I heard the lion roar furiously at Mummy. I saw its big tongue wipe against its teeth. Its eyes were huge and it looked annoyed. I saw that it was stepping on Bella's nice flower beds. Oh, Bella won't be happy about that. Mummy ran away from the lion and I saw a dark thing move. Bella's POV. The dark figure moved and Maria was on the ground. Her head was cut badly and her neck was near the figure's mouth. Simon fell to the ground, being dropped from Maria's arms. Simon crawled back towards her. He looked terrified from the dark monster that gripped Maria's neck. Simon clung to his mother and whimpered, hiding in her hair. I stared in horror before I willed my legs to move forward, to stop this madness I was witnessing. I snapped at the dark figure at a poor attempt for scaring it off. It looked up at me slowly. Its eyes were a brilliant bright red and blood smeared its ends. I was horror-stricken. It killed Maria. I looked back down at Simon, panicking. That thing might kill Simon too. I snapped at the monster furiously and it jumped back in lightning speed. Ever so carefully I picked Simon up by his clothes with my teeth and put him on my back. He was still in his wailing episode and he probably never felt me but him on my back. The monster stared at me. Its red eyes showed no existence of emotion. I ran and jumped over the flat's big fence, trying to get Simon as far away from here as possible. I ran into town. A very, very bad idea. Next thing I knew, police cars were surrounding me and Simon. People were screaming and the fire brigades were thinking of a plan for how to get the child safely away. I saw people running, evacuating homes, even schools were being forced to leave by the police. I didn't worry at all. I had a plan. I leaned to the side slightly, trying to make Simon fall off. But when I moved, police guns were aimed at me. The leader? I assumed told them to hold fire. I bucked my hip a bit so that I could shake Simon off. He clung to my fur, shaking in fear. I shook harder and then Simon fell off. I didn't let him fall all the way. I stuck my leg out and he plopped down on it. He scrambled off my leg and ran towards the crowd of people who were crying, "Gamma, Gandon." He cried to the old couple. I looked back at the police slowly backing away into the forest. Surprisingly, they let me go and I sprinted into the dark forest. Everything had happened so quickly. I sat down on the rock doing nothing. Who am I? What am I? I thought repeatedly while I trekked through the unnerving forest silently. Well, I was definitely not human, or anything else for that matter. I sighed and sunk to the ground. Exhausted. Isabella. I looked up, instantly afraid. Who knew who I was? I was not normal Bella. I looked around till I was faced with a monster. The monster took down its hood and an ancient pale face with pure white hair stared at me. His red eyes looked evil as he smiled or grimaced at me. "My name is Chaos," he said, stalking towards me in the dark night, "and that is all you need to know." He whispered before everything went black. I got awoken by a movement, a pair of arms. They were wrapped around me securely. I was in someone's arms, being rocked gently. Confused and groggy from sleep, I opened my eyes in the blackness to see a stunning pair of emerald eyes staring back at me. "She's awake," a girl hissed from somewhere in the dark room. "Shut up, Jeremiah, you'll wake her up." Another voice responded. "About time too," the voice muttered. I was surprised I could hear so much. My hearing range had stretched to wonders. The rocking stopped. Lots of other voices in the room spoke in very hushed voices. Green eyes stared at me. It looked worried. The eyes leaned in closer and the piercing green eyes were all what I saw. The eyes alone dazzled me and I wondered what the face would look like. "Bella, is that your name?" A velvety, male voice spoke quietly. "A boy," I gasped quietly. How did he know my name? I didn't even know who he was. I stared at the eyes and whispered yes, nodding a little. We stared at each other for a long time before someone spoke. "Are you awake, Bella?" a woman asked from somewhere in the room. The voice of what I thought was Jamil snorted. "Of course she's awake." Now I tried to ignore her. "How did you know my name?" I asked wearily. No one explained anything of my time being here, but by the noise I expected it to be a couple of people here. I heard a rustling noise and then there was a bright light. I squeezed my eyes shut when the sudden light stung my eyes. "Open your eyes, Bella," the lady said. "You have to make your eyes adjust sometime," she sighed. I shook my head stubbornly. My stubbornness always took over me when I didn't want to do something and nothing could win over me. Which I was glad. I felt a hand caress my cheek and my eyes snapped open. And they stayed open. My eyes wouldn't blink and my mouth too popped open against my will. My eyes widened and I gasped at the face of perfection just a few inches from my face. He was no boy, but a young man about my age. His glorious features were flawlessly imprinted to his face. His bronze hair was messy, though it looked very nice, going in nearly every direction. His perfect lips parted and he smiled a dazzling smile, bringing out his emerald eyes. I thought it was the bright light I had to adjust to, but it wasn't. It was this angel that absorbed all of the light and then shone it out for all to see. "Hello, Bella," the angel greeted me. I was only able to nod a bit. He frowned slightly when he felt me go like jelly in his strong arms. He shifted a bit like he was going to set me up on my feet. I stiffened, grabbing onto his arm. I shook my head and thought desperately. No, no, no. I didn't want to leave his arms. It was so comforting and it made me feel protected, in a good way. To my relief he stopped moving. His head snapped towards me and he gazed at me with curiosity. I stared back sheepishly. "Bella?" I heard his voice clear in my head, my mouth popping open again and my eyes widened more. His lips did not move but I heard his voice clear as bell in my head. "I heard you." "Well, you spoke to me, in your head. You can hear me, right, Bella?" Of course I could hear him. He was in my head. I was lost in my own world of fantasy, listening to the beautiful vibrations of his voice. "UHM," I could only respond back to him. He chuckled. The other lady walked up to us and sat down on the floor cross-legged. She looked in her late 20s. Her silky black hair was in neat plaits that went down to her shoulders. She was wearing a white top that was stained with blood with black skinny jeans that was also torn. She had a small smirk on her lips, as if she was enjoying a private joke. "Bella, we know your name," the lady said. "You were saying it in your sleep." She motioned with her hand for the others to come to her. 10 more people walked towards us and sat near the lady. I blushed, embarrassed at the thought of them listening to my mumbles, especially if I was in the angel's arms all night. The thought of it made me feel weird and warm inside. I tried to focus on the lady who was talking to me. I struggled to think of something to say. I thought of the most innocent one. "Who are you?" I asked her. The lady sat up straight and looked me in the eye. "My name is Amber, and that young man there is Edward." She pointed at the bronze-haired angel. I looked at Edward and smiled at him. He grinned back, dazzling me for a second before I turned back to Amber and nodded at her to go on. everyone here is shapeshifters. We all had our own experience of phasing for the first time, and you, Bella, had yours, yes? I nodded, shivering slightly at the memory. Amber continued. They put you in here when we were sleeping at night. You were in your normal form. She nodded to herself. We all knew you were something special. Changing into a ferocious mountain lion can attract the Volturi very well. She chuckled. I gasped. I was a lion? No wonder little Simon was so scared. I thought sadly. Okay, back to the shape-shifting thing. I'm confused, I confessed, looking at Amber. How can we control it? Can we choose what we want to turn it into? And what is a Volturi? I questioned Amber, my head was spinning in circles. Too much information, too many questions in one day. We can control it. The shape-shifting thing. It is quite easy when you know how to do it. You just have to think of an animal or a living thing you want to be and imagine yourself being it. Let your body relax into it. Never phased by anger or a strong emotion, because that will only cause you pain. Amber answered only two of my questions. What is a Volturi? I asked, scanning the room for any answers. All of their faces hardened and pain crossed Amber's features. She probably had a bad experience with it. Amber took a jagged breath. Her emotions were starting to act on me, and I suddenly felt nervous by everyone's reaction by the name Volturi. Edward? I asked, squirming around to face him again. I looked at his face and lost my train of thought. What was I thinking of again? Edward looked down on me with sad but hate-filled eyes. The Volturi are vile, disgusting vampires that kill innocent lives just so that they can feed off them for their empty souls, he growled. His voice was so filled with undeniable hate I cowered back in fright. He make them seem so repulsive. Vampires? I mumbled to myself. I never knew that vampires existed, but then again, I never knew that shapeshifters existed too. Edward's eyes hardened. I'm afraid so, he muttered. His hard eyes were far away, thinking of something that I guessed was far away from this place. We're in the Volturi place now, I said. It wasn't a question because I knew we were in the vampire's lair. I could sense it. The monster's house. My thoughts automatically went to chaos. Amber changed the subject quickly. I could tell she was uncomfortable in this subject. Bella, can you shapeshift when you want to? Amber asked. Edward shifted and I was suddenly sitting up on my own. I looked at Amber. I don't know, I admitted, looking down at my hands. I never really tried to do it when I knew before, I said, shrugging. Amber rolled her eyes. Right, Bella, Amber remarked sarcastically. I frowned. What? Why don't you just try now? She suggested, getting up. Go do it, Bella, Edward suggested as well. My heart hammered in my chest at his voice and I agreed. Okay, right, Amber exclaimed. We shall begin. Think of an animal, Amber instructed, pacing around like a military soldier. Yes, ma'am, I replied sarcastically. Behind me, Edward snickered. Playing with my hair, Amber pointed at him. You there, sir? Amber spoke directly at Edward. No playing with the lady. Amber all but yelled at him. Edward stopped playing with my hair. He folded his arms behind his back and muttered, Yes, ma'am. The other people laughed quietly behind Amber, stopping immediately when Amber glared at them. Right, Isabella, have you thought of an animal? Amber asked me sternly. I nodded. Yes, ma'am, I said in the same tone as Amber, trying as hard as I could not to burst out laughing. Now, Isabella, imagine you being that animal. Relax into it. Live the life of that animal, Isabella. Amber lost the sternness of her tone completely and whispered. I relaxed. I completely forgot about our silly game. I was imagining my life as the animal I was living in. Edward was with me, talking softly. I was completely relaxed. The tingling sensation ran over my body. I strained to keep it there, relaxing eagerly to keep the tingling feeling there. It got stronger but it started to fade. I strained again to keep it strong but it faded completely. I opened my eyes to see Amber's shocked face staring at me in awe. What? I asked, but my voice sounded like a weird animal noise. I quickly looked down to see my spotted paws. The sharp claws I knew well was hidden between my thumbs. My paws patted the floor in appreciation. I was the animal I loved. I was a cheetah. Bella cheetah, I grinned, looking at Edward's smile. Suddenly, the door burst open. 6 dark figures appeared at the door. I stared at them, the monsters. I recognized them at once. The black hooded cloaks, the evil red eyes, the vampires. Edward moved and stood in front of me protectively, his arms spread wide. The 6 vampires turned to look at him. One of them took down their hood, and his hair was a pitch black in contrast with the black hood. It smiled, which surprised me. I never knew something so evil could do such a weird thing. Edward, it sighed happily. Have you decided yet to join the Volturi? The smiling one asked him. Edward shook his head stiffly. He moved a step back from the smiling vampire when it tried to move towards him. Dear Edward, you cannot run away from me. I have to know your thoughts. The vampire sighed. He started walking to Edward again, but he stopped instantly when he saw me, cowering behind Edward. The vampire's eyes widened and his small smile was stretched in a wide grin. This is the newest edition. The vampire all but squealed in excitement at me. I snarled at him. He was making me uncomfortable. The vampire held his hand out to me. I stared blankly at it, not sure what to do. Bella, you touch it, Edward whispered in my head. I stepped forward a bit so I was only half a step away from the monster. I lifted my shaking paw and placed it gingerly in his white palm. The vampire's hands closed tightly around it and I flinched from the coldness of his temperature. The vampire closed his eyes for half a minute. He opened them and smiled slightly at me. Isabella, he chuckled quietly. You, my dearest Isabella, will not allow me into your mind. He explained. I growled at him, shoving my paw out of his grip. I walked back to Edward. The vampire's accusation made me feel angry. I was not his dearest. His dearests are those flimsy vampires on the other side of the room, I thought angrily to Edward. Edward seemed to agree with me. He nodded angrily, somewhat hated what that monster said to me. The vampire watched me in amusement as I growled out strings of profanities he didn't understand. He looked at me gravely, speaking. You have quite a temper there, Isabella, but we all need to tame our new pets, don't we? He walked away from me, back to the monster guard. Jane, he asked, looking at the smaller vampire. Edward moved then, positioning himself in front of me. He growled a low warning sound. No, Aro. He growled. The one I think is now named Aro turned around. Edward, I think you should move away, unless... Run, Bella? Edward told me from my head. I looked at his face. It was afraid. I yelped quietly. What should I do? I'm not leaving you. Edward's face twisted in frustration. Anywhere, just hide? Now I looked around quickly. Everyone's face was afraid, like they knew what was going to happen. Amber met my stare and she mouthed, run. So I did. I jumped nimbly away from them, hiding in a corner. I hid from them. Edward sighed in relief, but he was slightly strangled. Where is she? A female voice asked in irritation. I don't know. His voice was so innocent I believed him myself, even in my position. You're lying, the girl hissed. I heard a deep growling. A higher snarl responded from the girl's mouth. I considered coming out from hiding, but I stayed put, realizing that might ruin Edward's plan. Fine then, the girl said again, but this time it was in a sickly sweet voice that I immediately hated. There was a short silence. I then heard Edward yell in pain. I jumped from my hiding spot, my gaze locked on to Edward's form. He was on his knees, his hands were in his hair, pulling tightly. Edward! I screamed frantically in his head. I saw the small vampire staring at him, still smiling sweetly. Everything fit into place. She was the one causing him pain. I could see that Edward was trying his best not to scream, but his face was contorted in pain and he writhed against the pain that was killing him. I growled loudly, causing everyone's head to turn my way. I was so furious I tried as hard as I could to stop phasing into something I really didn't have time for. Instead I phased back into my normal form and, which I had no idea I could do, I ran over to where Edward was writhing in agony. Edward, I screeched, wrapping my arms around him, trying to hide him from the monster's view. Without realizing what I was doing, I projected a bubble around us both. The bubble I saw was like water. It shimmered slightly when the light reflected on it. Its transparent form was very strong. Something told me it could protect us. Edward stopped whimpering. I knew the pain was gone for him, but he didn't remove his hands from his hair. I gently pried his fingers from his hair carefully and kept his hand in mine. He was still shaking, so I rubbed his back in comfort. He still wasn't himself yet. He lifted his head weakly and his eyes met mine. I saw little wet marks near his eyes. "Bella?" he whispered. I nodded weakly. He sighed, completely forgetting about the vampires or the other people in the room, and leaned his head on my chest, breathing raggedly. We were interrupted by a joyful laugh. I turned my head to glare at Aro. "What?" I hissed, trembling slightly. Aro looked at me with a wide smile. "Isabella has a gift," he celebrated, clapping his hands in excitement. I was shocked. "A gift?" I questioned. I thought that the bubble meant something, but then I realized suddenly that no one else here had seen the invisible bubble except me. Aro interrupted me from my musing with a delightful laugh. "Yes. Oh, Isabella and Edward, you must join us," Aro declared. He sounded like a little child. Before I could respond, Aro interrupted me again. "Edward and Isabella's talents can be so useful to our guard." This brought me up short. "What kind of talents does Edward have?" I asked hesitantly, still expecting him to turn into a huge one-eyed dinosaur thing and eat us all. "Oh, I don't know, maybe if you were talking to that same monster that tortured your friends and Noah can kill you any second." Note the sarcasm. "Telekinesis," Edward spat out through his chattering teeth. I rubbed circles in his palm with my thumb soothingly. "Oh," I replied, lost in thought. I thought back through what the vampire had said to me and viewed it in Aro's conversation with his monster guard. "Aro, we are not joining your vampire guard," I snorted in disgust. I would shiver at the thought of being with those monsters for the rest of my life. "He won't give us a choice," Edward said helplessly in my head. "No, Edward, he will give us a choice. He has to give us a choice." I disagreed. Edward shook his head. I glanced up at Aro. My face was pleading. Aro raised his eyebrows at me. "Well, my dears, I'm afraid you have no choice," Aro said happily, all my hopes crushed. I stared at him in disbelief. There was no way he could be serious. It felt like someone slapped me across the face and laughed. "Huh? You got slapped? What you gonna do about it?" Edward cringed back into my arms. I looked up, and a huge, burly monster was walking towards us menacingly. Edward jumped out of my hold and pulled me with him. He backed away from the monster with me behind him. He growled a deep, warning snarl at the enormous vampire that was 4 heads higher than him. My shield was at the ready and I felt it multiply in strength. My bubble shield now looked like a transparent, metal shield that I was sure it was indestructible. "My shield," I thought to Edward desperately. Edward's head inclined in my direction. "Shield?" he thought in my head, confused. I nodded and tugged on his arm, making him come back to me and away from the monster that was stalking us. Ember and the rest stood as far away from us as possible. It made me angry that they couldn't do anything to help us. But I knew it wasn't their fault that the Volturi came for me and Edward to join them. They would probably make us watch them feed of humans. That thought got me disgusted. They would make us watch the innocent be drained lifelessly, then throw them in a bin like rubbish. I glared at the big monster with pure hate. My shield seemed to agree with me. It pushed back sharply to the vampire and the vampire flew into the wall with an ear-splitting bang. Edward stared at me in shock. I guess that vampire was pretty heavy then. I didn't waste a second of this. "We needed to get out of here. Come on," I yelled to Edward, sprinting out of the door. He went along with me, but much faster. He disappeared out of the door, swinging me on his back. In the process of doing so, the vampires tried to catch us, but my shield made them go flying back into the room again. I focused on keeping it there when Edward and I flew out the Volturi dungeon and into the dark night. After a while of running, Edward whispered, "Bella." I looked down on him and saw his face was calculating something. He nodded to himself and whispered to me again, "Phase, the guard is following us." Sure enough, I heard a rustling in the distance and a whooshing of air being moved by a quick movement. I closed my eyes and thought of being a bird. A crow I suddenly felt lifted up, being plunged into the sky. I opened my eyes to see the dark forest beneath me, a long way down to fall into. My arms felt like they were stretching and a pair of dark wings appeared at my sides. My face was twisted and it relaxed, forming a beak. The cold air that whooshed past me was gone and I felt very warm, The feathers were on every part of my body and I felt free. I saw another crow on the other side of me. Edward. His bird form was magnificent. It was so perfect and strong. Something the bird watchers would pay millions just to see. A quick glance at the beautiful blackbird by my side. Instincts kicked in and my wings flapped gently. Big strokes were like gliding and I enjoyed the rush of it. I was completely in contentment in my airtime. A squawk shocked me out back to reality and I heard Edward's voice more clearly than ever. Now we were both the same animal. In my own head, where are we going to fly to? He asked, gliding along effortlessly. Anywhere, as long as it is away from this place, I responded confidently. Edward nodded. They've stopped searching for us now, and they've gone back to the dungeon. He filled me in. I sighed in relief but looked at him skeptically. I can hear them. I've more experience than you, remember? He chuckled when I huffed but tried to ignore it. We will stop in a place when we get tires. I thought to Edward, but right now we fly for our lives. So Edward and I flew out of the country as fast as ever, for our lives. It could have been days, months till we decided to stay in a place far away from the Volturi. The place was rainy. It had lots of trees, forests surrounding everything in a secure dome. Forks, Washington, America. Edward and I both decided it was perfect. We phased to our normal forms. The bliss of my airtime was finished and I was dead tired. We both rented a flat near a town called Forks. Apparently the room Edward rented had only a double bed. That didn't really seem to bother us. We fell asleep as soon as our heads touched the pillow. I woke up to a rainy morning. The rain was pelting the windows. The wallpaper seemed worn out and damp. In the bathroom a peeling wall was hidden by a broken sink. I couldn't take any more of this claustrophobic room. I jumped out of bed where Edward was still sleeping. He looked so cute, and got changed into a short purple summer dress with a white blouse underneath with white flats. Not really caring if Edward saw me or not, I stormed downstairs to the reception. Excuse me, I knocked on the glass window. The old woman from behind the glass window looked up. She looked like she was in her late 50s. Her orange hair was tied back in a tight bun and her unnatural tanned orange skin clashed with everything she wore. Poor lady, she might be trying to hide her wrinkles. I could still see them, because of my super sight, and there were lots. Yes? Her voice was muffled, probably forgetting to speak into the microphone. Hint, hint. I took out the hair bubble in my long hair and wringed it out with my hands, a habit, while saying, my partner and I would like to check out of this flat. We would like to live elsewhere. I said sweetly. It gave me butterflies when I referred Edward to my partner. The woman looked shocked at my confirmation. I smiled sweetly at her. Oh, she furrowed her eyebrows nervously. Is there a problem with that room, sweetie? I grimaced. I'm not a baby, so there would be no reason for her to call me sweetie. Oh no, there is no problem with it, I lied. Flashing my bright teeth, it's just that we like to travel a lot, so we want to find a suitable, come back home and home, you know, I explained to her briefly. That bit was true. We did want to find a suitable home to live in. Edward and I had been closer every minute we spent together. We mostly just goofed about listening to people go toilet and wrestling in our animal forms. Plus, I did not like flats anymore. The lady seemed to understand. Oh, okay. She fumbled around her desk for a minute. She came up with a checkout paper and handed it to me through the crack underneath the glass. Fill this in, and when you're ready to leave, put the keys in that pocket holder there. She patted to the plastic pocket holder with her pen. And then bring that down to me again and I'll fill some things in. You'll be able to leave properly then, she explained. I nodded and went back up to the room. Edward was pacing across the room when I came in. He quickly turned and hugged me tightly. Bella. He sighed in relief, as he crushed me to his chest. What? I asked, muffled by his shirt. He let me go, but kept his hand in mine. I loved the tingly feeling of it. I thought the Volturi took you, he admitted, shuddering at the thought. I looked at him. I don't think I would survive if they took you away from me. My heart skipped a bit at that. I sighed happily, hugging him again. My aura was so loving I was tempted to kiss him right then. I tried to take it lightly. Well, if you listened to me talking downstairs, then maybe with your fantastic hearing you would know where I was. I teased, slapping his chest. He laughed. The vibration rumbled against my cheek. Yeah, but in those few seconds I thought. He trailed off, pain filling his eyes. I placed my hand on his cheek. I wouldn't be able to live again if they took you too, I whispered. He grabbed my hand and kissed it, staring me intently in the eyes. Our faces unconsciously moved closer. My eyes were focusing on his lips. They were so soft and welcoming. We both jumped when my phone alarm set off. I cursed, taking my phone out from my dress pockets. 10, wake up. It read on the little device's screen. Stupid alarm, next time I swear to God, little phone, you will. I mumbled quietly. I felt Edward kiss my hair. I didn't notice he was laughing until I felt his shaking body hug me again. And exactly how often does this evil little phone get on your nerves, he asked with too innocent curious expression. I glared at the phone in my hands. Too much of my damn time, I muttered. I suddenly remembered the paper that was creasing beneath us. Oh, I gasped. Pulling away from Edward, I straightened the paper out and set it on the small coffee table. Have you got a pen? I asked him, but he already had the pen in his hand. Smiling happily, he filled the whole paper out in a few minutes and put the keys in the pad. All done. Edward grinned at me. Fast, huh? He grinned at my incredulous expression. Don't ask. I grinned back and took the paper from him. I skipped downstairs back to the reception and handed her the paper without hesitation. She took her time to fill in her bits of the paper. She smiled at me when she was done. Goodbye now, dear. She smiled warmly. I called for Edward from upstairs. We are going. Get down here now. I waited at the door. The lady looked at me again. Is everything all right there? She asked as I leaned near the doorway. Gosh, she was nosy. Yes, just waiting for my partner, I replied. A few seconds later, Edward appeared at the door beside me. Just out of nowhere. I bit back a scream. I was never used to being freaked out, and I was a bit of a coward. Hello there, partner. Edward grinned his lopsided smile. I blushed, a dark shade of red. He heard everything. I mentally cursed myself. I could have said, brother to the lady, cousin, and friend. But no, I just had to babble out partner. Now Edward is going to go around, introducing me as his wife. Well, not that I didn't really mind or anything. I could get used to it, could I? I mean, I kind of like the sound of it. My lips turned up in a smile. Isabella? I frowned. Edward? I asked, without even thinking through what I was going to say. He stared at me while we were going out of the door. Yes, he replied, stopping at the sidewalk. What's your last name? I asked, completely unaware of his growing smile. Masson, he replied simply. My small smile turned to a big smile. Isabella Masson. I whispered to myself. It didn't sound too bad after all. Edward's head snapped in my direction. Bella? He asked slowly. I nodded. He just laughed, running his hands through his hair. I blushed. I was probably red like a bus right now. I know I whispered it, but I never knew Edward could hear as well. I kept my head down. I quickly changed the subject. We don't have a car, I realized. Edward seemed distracted for a moment. Car? Edward questioned, coming out of his thinking time. He seemed like he was considering something. No stealing. This place is small enough to spread rumors all through the town. I quickly butted that in. He looked down at me and smiled. We'll run, he said simply. Where to, Mr. Masson? One asked as he took my hand. To the forest, of course, Mrs. Masson. He gestured to the trees with his hand. It was pretty dark and gloomy because of the early morning in Forks. He pulled me along to the forest. I stayed by his side at all times. You never know what lurks in there. And do what? I asked, confused. Edward shrugged. I had heard houses and forests are very nice actually. He winked. My breath caught. We had been walking for a while now. During that time Edward asked me about the name swapping thing again. I couldn't lie, so I told him the truth. Well, I figured that if you would be calling me your wife or girlfriend or something. Edward's eyes brightened at that. Then I was just curious for what my name would be, so I asked you your last name, and I entwined it with mine. I had replied. You seemed very happy, Edward had pointed out. His eyes held mine. I shrugged. It sounded nice together, I admitted, sheepishly. Edward nodded. Yes, it did, he agreed. I smiled at the memory. That was only 20 minutes ago. I stayed by Edward, partly because it was starting to rain, so I used him as an umbrella. We trekked through the forest at a human speed, not until it started to pour down with rain. I thought it was Edward pouring a bucket of water over my head. That was how heavy the rain was. I pulled my shield out from my mind and focused on making a dome around Edward and me. A few seconds of concentration, the rain bounced off my shield, not even hitting us once. Edward looked up in amazement. "We are not wet," he realized. Looking around, I laughed. "Yes we are, look." I brought up my drenched arm to his face. "See?" I giggled. "We are just not getting wet now, before we were? See now?" I shook out my soaking wet hair. That now looked like wet stringy material. It sprayed Edward. "Oh," Edward said, blushing in embarrassment. He recovered and pulled back a stray of hair that was stuck to my wet forehead. He grinned. "I see, you're wet, Bella." He laughed. I scowled at him. "Well done for spotting that, Mr. Know-it-all. Well, look at you. Your hair is not sticky-uppy anymore." I pretended to mock horror at him. I patted his flat hair. He frowned. "It comes back to normal when I phase," he muttered. My head cocked to the side. "It does?" I asked him, interested. He nodded. "Cool," I hissed, punching the air with my fist. He just chuckled. We had been walking for quite a while now. I was going to ask Edward a question, but he suddenly stopped walking. I knew this sign. From only being with him for nearly 2 days, me already knew his weak spots, fears, and knowing that he is fully aware when he suspects danger. "There's only one thing that means danger, Edward?" I asked, panicking slightly. He pulled me behind him and growled into the forest. "Uh-oh, this is bad. This is really bad now, Edward," I cried out. He was scaring me now. He looked at me suddenly. His eyes were afraid, defensive. "Just smell it, Bella," he snapped, pointing to the forest. Obediently, I sniffed the air carefully. It was faint. But I knew that smell anywhere. Even in the wettest place I'd ever been to in my life. I gasped, "Edward." I choked out. My knees buckled beneath me and I held on to him for support. If not, I would have fallen. "I know," Edward snarled. He said it. I didn't want to hear it again. But I heard him, and the name ripped through me in disgust. "Vampire." We stayed absolutely still. Our breaths were low and steady. Vampires could hear our breaths from miles away. Forget that, they could hear our very own heartbeats. And my heartbeat, for that matter, is hammering in my chest right now. "Edward," I thought to him. His head inclined in my direction, though his eyes scanned the perimeter routinely. "Yes, they're not here, right?" I asked him. I could smell the scent of the vampire. It was very faint. The rain washed most of it away. But I knew the smell was about a day old, not fresh. "No, but they was, and that's enough trouble we need now." He took a small step forward. I stayed near him. The umbrella use was long gone. The rain had slowed to a drizzle. We were cautious, taking calculated steps through the thicket and only talking out loud when needed. I seemed to get my normal confidence back and I walked at a normal pace through the trees. It was starting to rain again when we approached a driveway. It was weird because this driveway leads to a house, obviously. But this house was right in the middle of the forest. There was no wind. The rain came down horizontally and my shield protected us, as usual. Edward seemed hesitant as we followed the driveway. It started to get wider. A small wind blew and a strong scent wafted around my sensitive nose. I froze. Edward looked horror-stricken. He pulled me behind him again and took long strides back from the huge white mansion that towered through the trees. It was beautiful. It was so white and clean. There was an open bit behind the house where a blue river bubbled quietly in front of a wall of trees. It was amazing. I wanted to see more. But there were vampires in there, blood-sucking monsters. I was torn. The need to see more of this intriguing model and the need to flee from the vampires from this place was on the same level. Edward yanked on my arm. "Bella." He was panicking. I stood where I was. My muscles were locked in place. Edward pulled harder. "Bella. It's not safe." He hissed in my ears. I didn't notice that I was walking forwards till Edward pulled me back sharply. "What?" I asked, strangely calm. Edward looked into my eyes. "What the hell do you think you are doing, Bella?" He growled quietly as I started walking again. I just felt really curious at a sudden, and without willing to do so my legs moved forward again as a curious feeling overwhelmed me. I didn't like it. This feeling was not what I wanted. I really wanted to run away, now. But the dominant feeling was begging me to explore this wonderful place. It was a strange pull, and I did not like it. Edward. I called to him desperately. He looked confused. Stop. Make it stop. I cried out to him. I don't know how. Edward whispered to me as he tried to pull me back again. I was right at the porch door now, my hand lifted to open the door. I turned the knob and the door swung open to reveal a very confused vampire. The last thing I remembered was Edward growling loudly at the house, and the curious feeling slipping my energy was no more, and when the overwhelming feeling vanished, it took the last energy I had. Dizzy and feeling kind of sick, I fell into the pool of unconsciousness. Edward's POV. We were walking through the forest aimlessly. Well, Bella thought that I knew where I was going, but I had no idea. She would look up to me with her chocolate brown eyes. Her cute button nose would wrinkle when she would ask for the millionth time, "How long are we walking for?" I would just laugh at her. She looked so cute when she was annoyed. I could hear all of the amazing wildlife out here. The tiny insects were literally inside every tree trunk. That would usually freak me out when I was human. Or like one at least. I remembered when I first changed. I was having a 21st birthday party with just my mates and me. I was at my friend's house. His mom had decided to give me a surprise party at her house because she thought it was ridiculous to not celebrate. We had the party in all chairs like any other one. Drinks, cake, more drinks. I didn't have any of the alcohol rubbish my mates had. I was more civilized. It was then that when I came home, my whole world I'd known as life crashed. It was my family. My loving mother, my loyal, trustworthy father, my two amazing sisters I cherished and loved to my core. The reason I existed in this fateful world. They were bleeding, broken, dead. I remembered how I felt. Shock, confusion, pain, hurt, anger, pain and more pain. So much pain. The feeling of pain was too much, and I felt as if my whole body was a live wire. A wire that coursed through me painfully, pricking my skin with their needle touches. It was terrifying. 1 minute I was Edward, the next, monster. I lashed out unthinkingly. My pain subsided and I was furious. Furious of who would ever try to hurt my family. I fought out my feelings to the things around me. I fought, I screamed, cried, and I felt the terrifying feeling overwhelm me. I unthinkingly lashed out again. It wasn't until I heard the voice I stopped. Edward, I growled and searched for the sound. It was from the middle of the room. I could see it. A black-covered man stood before me. His vibrant eyes were black and hungry. Unthinkingly, again, I growled at it. Setting in my surroundings, I gasped. Dead bodies smothered the floor in a great heap near the man. I could only stare. He killed them, all of them. I knew it. With that I backed away. I had to get out of here, now. Edward, the man purred from the dark thing that covered him. I backed away quickly when I saw it make way towards me. It had another figure behind him, ghosting just as quiet as he was. Stay away. I warned him. Why? He purred. You killed them. I yelled at him. That made him stop. He cocked his head to the side. I did not. He smiled slightly. Look again. Look at the bodies. Who killed them? The figure behind him looked at me in the eyes. I felt weird. My mind was mush and I looked at the bodies again. Suddenly all I could think of was me attacking them. It was so nearly real I gasped and fell to the floor. All the time the figure locked eyes with me. Now tell me again, Edward, who killed these innocent people? He purred. I looked at him, truly terrified. I did. I whispered. The person smirked. Sorry, I can't hear you. He stepped closer. I imagined him staying away from me as possible. With that he suddenly bolted to the air, his body lifted upwards and he kicked his legs frantically. What was I doing? Was I doing this? I imagined him being thrown against the wall with almighty force. He did just that. I let go of my imagination snap at once and I suddenly felt weak. I moaned slightly as I fell to my knees. I heard him coming again. There was an unnatural breeze and I heard his voice to my ear. Tell me who killed these innocent people, Edward?" he asked again. I looked up at him slowly. My beseeching eyes stared through his dark ones. I whispered. "It was me, wasn't it?" He grinned evilly. "Well done, Charles. Your gift came in handy." He smiled at the dark figure behind him. His white hand clamped hard on my neck. I couldn't breathe. Then everything went black. I was shocked out from my daydreaming by a smell. It came from through the thicket. It was really old, so I didn't pay much attention to it for a few minutes. It wasn't when the scent suddenly got stronger, though still faint, that I stopped completely. Bella instantly grabbed my hand. The electric current coursed through my hand and squeezed it. I looked down to her. Her eyebrows were furrowed and concentrating. I stepped away from the scent trail that led to a huge white house. On my guard, I pulled Bella behind me. There were vampires here. I backed away slowly, but realizing that Bella wasn't doing the same, I turned my head to the frozen Bella in front of me. Her face seemed like it was concentrating very hard to focus. Even her hands were balled up into tiny fists down her sides. I didn't understand her expression though. It was as if she was fighting something in her head. Her lips were trembling and she was staring right at the white building before us. "Bella," I pleaded for her. She was suddenly walking forward, and her steps seemed unnoticed and forced. "Strange, Bella, it's not safe," I whispered. She didn't take any notice of me. She was still walking forward. I couldn't control myself. I yanked her back by the arm with all my strength. It stopped her, and for that I sighed in relief. Bella looked up at me, a small smile on her lips. "What?" she said, strangely calm, though I could still see that fighting, almost a resistance like a fire in her brown eyes. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Bella?" I snapped. This wasn't like her. She was normally quite afraid of these things. Vampires in particular. Bella responded by walking to the White House again. I growled in frustration, though I was terrified, though still following her helplessly. Just then I heard her beautiful voice clear as bell in my head. "Edward." I saw the backfire in her eyes, stronger than before. "Stop. Make it stop," she gasped. I tugged her arm gently. "I don't know how," I whispered at her delicate ear. With a stab of nausea, I realized we were right outside the front door. I watched in horror as Bella reached out to turn the knob. There was a noise behind it and a very pale man appeared in the doorway. This was the day, even though I didn't know it, that I found my place in the world, with Bella, and with our new family, the Cullens. I shot out right from my dream by my alarm clock. Clammy sweat stuck to my forehead and my brown ringlets were spread widely out of control from the loss of my hairband. The hairband always keeps my hair tame in sleep, but it always falls off. I thought about tying the knot harder, but Alice would all but bite my head off if I did. She said it was meant to be free and not being forced against its will. I slammed my hand down on the alarm to make it stop beeping. Ever since I and Edward escaped from the Volturi, we came and found a coven of vampires. They were different than the ones in Volterra, so we stayed with them. But in our own house, Edward is the icon of true beauty. His flawless features more beautiful and perfect than a vampire's one, and he is a shapeshifter like me, and we are soulmates meant to stay forever with each other. And yes, I was officially Isabella Masson. Everyone else were such like a family to us. It was shockingly pleasant. Alice was a short, pixie-type vampire who loves shopping. Maybe love is an underestimate of her addiction to it. She is very beautiful with black sticky up hair and moves like a ballerina. Then there's Emmett, the goofy bear. He's huge and intimidating, but really he is a big softie. His lack of brains, his curly brown hair and broad goofy grin were really his trademark. Next there's Jasper, Alice's soulmate. He is calm and serious. He has blonde hair and scars covering every inch of his body. But he's nice. Next on the list is Rosalie, the model-like vampire, golden hair reaching her back like a golden waterfall, and her face is the most beautiful out of Esme and Alice. Rosalie is Emmett's soulmate. Then Esme and Carlisle. Esme is a sweet, mother hen vampire with a heart-shaped face and caramel curly hair only reaching her shoulders. She is stern on rare occasions, and you have to admit it, one day with her and you'll want to spend the rest of your life with her. Her soulmate is Carlisle, who is a doctor, father figure vampire. How ironic. He has blonde hair and, like Esme, is stern on rare occasions, since their children is perfect and causes no trouble. Ha, yeah right, I walked into my bathroom, still light on my feet from the sleeping, and took a shower. The water hitting my face woke me up a little, and I bounded from the shower when I was finished and went to wash my hair. A few minutes later I heard a noise outside in the bedroom. It was a shuffling kind of noise. I finished washing quickly and put a towel on my hair to dry. I skipped out of the huge bathroom to see Edward leaning on the side of the bathroom door frame. He looked happy, naturally. "Hey," I breathed as I skipped lightly to his side, humming the lullaby he made me a few weeks ago. Edward grinned my favorite crooked smile and leaned down to kiss the edge of my jaw. "Good morning, love," he murmured on my neck, slowly kissing down it and up again. His light breath fanned my skin tenderly. I smiled softly and he wound his arms around my waist to pull me closer to him. I took his face in my hands and kissed him softly. We continued for a few minutes until I broke away, motioning to him to get out the room, then doing hand gestures to my bathrobe covering my naked body. Edward chuckled and walked to his bathroom, probably getting a shower. I got changed quickly to a short-sleeved white top and dark, denim jeans with Converses, finishing off with some mascara and black studded earrings. I skipped downstairs to our kitchen and started making a fried breakfast. The bacon and egg with hash browns were Edward's favorite, as mine was egg, bacon with toast smoldered with butter then warmed. You can't go wrong with that. I'd always adored this kitchen living room. It was wooden with a few modern things like the Nintendo Wii or the flat-screen TV that stood out from one wall to the other. It was stored in a long cupboard which we could open and close up. If the TV was closed up, you wouldn't think any existed, since the cupboard was like a second wall, with pictures on it and a hook to hang up the keys. At the corner of the large living room there was a beautiful pitch-black grand piano that shone confidently, even in the dark light. The sofas and love seats were beautifully arranged around the room, with a coffee table in front of the cozy fire that reflected on the dark polished wood flooring. There was a huge door that separated the living room from the kitchen near the winding staircase that went up only one floor, with a library stocked full of books in every angle. 3 unnecessary massive grand bathrooms, me and Edward's huge bedroom with our master cream-colored bed in the middle with brown fur carpet, Edward's office, the computer room stocked with computers, creativity room and a spare room. There was also an attic which you could go to through a door in Edward's office, going up the winding staircase to a big balcony where you could see the open space of the special meadow. Yes, we live near the meadow garden. When they revealed that the meadow is now my garden, I was ecstatic. The lake was to follow the little pathway me and Edward made through the trees to a brilliant circled blue lake with flowers embedding the perimeter. I loved gardening, which made us happy too. Though my main passion was art, canvases were flooding the creativity room so much that Edward had to put some on our garden balcony. The house had my greatest masterpieces on every wall. I was so proud. Though my life seemed incomplete in some way, I had Edward, my husband, my love of my life, and our vampire family. But that's just that. I wanted my own family. I wanted me and Edward to have our own shapeshifter family. The need for it was unbearable, just like Rosalie. I wanted to have a baby. I decided to talk to Edward about it as I set the breakfast on the breakfast and lunch table, which was in the corner of the light-wooded kitchen. The big window was right over it and I had put a bouquet of flowers on the window ledge. I heard Edward coming to the kitchen, and while I was pouring the last contents of the apple juice into the 2 glasses, when I turned around, a fully dressed Edward stood behind me. His arms were spread out wide, beckoning me to jump into them, and he had a wide smile on his perfect face. I put the glasses down and snuggled into his arms. "Well, hello there," I mumbled sarcastically into his chest. He laughed loudly and kissed my hair. He was always happy in the mornings, maybe because of those dreams of his. "Well, hello there too, Mrs. Masson," one gasped. Mrs. Masson always took me by surprise. I had smelt hash browns, so I went to investigate. "I hope there were for me?" he asked, slightly pouting. I shook my head. Playing with him? No, of course not. "They're for Emmett, silly Billy." I slapped him lightly on the chest and went to put out the drinks. Emmett always came round. Every morning he would play the PlayStation until Edward threw him out when he crossed our annoyance bar. But he would never cross the kitchen, claiming it smelled like foul-smelling dirt. I would never get to understand that. Well, he was a vampire after all. All what he does is drink blood and boast about how indestructible he is. We shapeshifters can have human food, or we could eat animals. The animal's flesh was sweet and lovely when cooked or raw. Either way was fine to us. Like if we shapeshift into an elk, We could eat the grass as we could change into a mountain lion. We could eat the elk. We have human characteristics and like a human shapeshifters can I hope get pregnant. Breakfast is on the table. I sang, completely forgetting what I said to him earlier. Edward was in the table in a flash, chewing on a mouthful of hash browns I covered his plate with. I threw the juice carton in the bin and sat down too. I put half of the egg in my mouth, chewing slowly, savoring the flavor. I would talk to him about it now, I decided. I looked down on my folded hands nervously. Why can't I be confident? I'm 21 years old, for goodness sake. I took a deep breath. Edward. I trailed off thinking where to start. You love me, right? It was the wrong thing to say, but I couldn't think of anything else. I peeked up at him through my eyelashes. I could definitely see love in there, but he looked confused as to what I just said. Of course I love you, Bella. You're the best change that happened in my life. He stated the obvious. Of course he loved me. He looked slightly hurt by my question, like he thought that I didn't love him back. I didn't want him to think like that. What are you trying to say? He asked, cocking his head to the side. His eyebrows creased and his emerald eyes still held the hurt I put in there. I cursed myself mentally. I know you love me, Edward, and I love you so much more than my life, I said lovingly, relieved that the hurt in his eyes had vanished and a blazing love took its place. He twined his hand with mine and looked at me in the eye. There's something else you want to say, love? Edward murmured, his stunning beauty shone suddenly by the sun coming up. How rare the sun is in Forks, I mused in my head. I nodded and my hand tightened in his. I want to make a family, Edward. I whispered, then ducked my head, wincing, afraid he didn't agree with me. I suddenly felt warm arms around me and I was resting my head against his chest, being rocked gently as I fought the tears that threatened to overflood my eyes. Bella, Edward murmured in my hair. You have no idea how badly I wanted that too, you know. He admitted. My hopes of being a mother had risen drastically and I found myself in his arms, kissing every part of his face joyfully. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. I squealed and jumped out his arms, putting both of my hands around his neck, reaching up slightly to press my lips to his. He chuckled. My joyful emotions affected the kiss hugely and we were interrupted by a loud knock on the oak door. Edward groaned and pulled away to get the door. I put the dishes in the washing machine and followed Edward out, shutting the door in the process. With my cup of red bush tea I made at my quickest time. 18.5 seconds. I leaned against the wall, watching as Edward opened the door for our visitors. As soon as Edward opened the door, Emmett stampeded through the door towards the living room yelling, "We Mario Kart, you're so going down." Emmett yelled until he got to the game. Edward and I looked at each other, his face mirrored exactly what I'm feeling now, then we burst out laughing, tears streaming down our faces as our laughter shook our bodies uncontrollably. My tea nearly spilled, so I tried as hard as I could to stop laughing. Other laughter joined us, one was high and tingling and the other one was manlier. I looked up to see Alice and Jasper coming through the door. Well, this was new. Bella. Alice screamed and hugged me with all her might, but grimaced when she smelled the aroma of tea. Alice. I mumbled breathlessly, her hold was so tight. Jasper punched Edward lightly on the arm. Hey bro, Jasper greeted Edward warmly. I see you have Emmett today. He chuckled and nodded to the living room. I'm afraid so, Jazz. Edward sighed back. Jasper chuckled and put one hand on Edward's back and said seriously, I feel your pain, dude. Literally, Jasper said. Me and Alice laughed quietly. Bella, I need to talk to you. Alice whispered in my ear. I nodded and headed outside to leave the boys alone. The other thing about shapeshifters is that we can communicate in the mind, so we can think something out loud and the other shapeshifter can hear it in their own mind too. I thought that was pretty amazing. Edward, Alice and I are going for a walk. Be back soon, I thought to Edward as Alice made her way to the back door. By the time we made it outside, I was straining to keep running to keep up with Alice's rushed pace. Somewhat we stopped when we were at a vampire hearing distance and a bouncing Alice turned to me. She was practically squealing the whole way here, so I wasn't surprised by the scream that escaped her tiny mouth. Oh my God, Bella. She screamed in my face, then she hugged me fiercely. I'm so happy for you. She sniffed, but then she stiffened. Rose? She sighed. What? What and what? It was all going so fast, and I still had no idea what Alice was talking about. Okay, Alice. Stop. Right now. And explain to me what the hell you're talking about. I screeched, frustrated a bit. Alice looked at me and explained, well, this morning I had a vision of you. You were pregnant. Alice yelled at me. I didn't want to attack Alice now out of absolute joy. Instead, I squeezed her with all my strength and cried out in joy, I'm going to have a baby. I yelled at the trees in triumph. Alice played along with me, skipping in circles around me and singing I Got a Feeling by Black Eyed Peas. It looked like Alice was going to say something else, but I was already flying through the trees towards my home, to Edward, and up the porch steps and into my house. I heard Edward playing the piano, so I sprinted to him and jumped into his arms. He was surprised for a moment before he relaxed and wound his arms around me. I didn't notice Emmett or Jazz until Emmett boomed, why so snugly, Bella Boo? Glad you're not a virgin anymore? Emmett laughed. I snarled at him under my breath but responded automatically. Alice saw a vision of me. I looked at Edward, pregnant. I squealed and started bouncing in his arms. Really? Jasper asked, focusing his attention on me, rather than the PlayStation. You're pregnant? Right now? Jasper asked. I frowned. Well, yeah. I realized. I twisted in Edward's arms to see his face. He looked down on me and showed me his happiest smile I ever saw when I was with him. He picked me up and spun me around the room, careful not to break anything though. Yes. Bella. He hissed and set me on my feet. I kissed him instantly and intensely, our lips moving in sync, tongues fighting for dominance. But each time we broke away, a smile lingered on the edges of our lips. Jasper coughed, continuously, until we stopped. Emmett, amazingly, didn't comment but went out the room muttering things like he had to go home to do the chores. Jasper stared after him, then got up instantly and breezed through the open front door when Alice yelled his name to go home. I glanced at Edward, but he seemed just as confused as I was. I shrugged it off and closed the door that was left hanging open. I suddenly remembered something. Edward, where's my tea? I asked, looking around for it. Edward ran his hand through his tousled bronze hair. He only did that when he was nervous. My eyes narrowed and I stepped forward till I was inches away from his face. I leaned inwards towards his closed mouth. Edward, open your mouth please, I instructed sweetly. He bit down his lip and shook his head. He was so stubborn. I looked him in the eye, pushing out my lip into a pout, making my eyes a little wider and batting my eyelashes like Alice taught me to do the irresistible puppy dog Bella. It was a heartbreaking sight. I hoped. Edward gave in with a sigh and opened his mouth. I leaned down again to his mouth and sniffed. The smell wafted from his mouth to my inspecting nose. It was a warm aroma, but mixed with spices I knew only too well. It was my red bush tea. Edward, you drank my tea. I moaned at him, hitting my head to his muscular chest. He stroked my hair comfortably. Yes, I did, love, he admitted sheepishly. I must admit, red bush tea is very soothing for worries, blows them all away. He sighed into my hair. I sighed too. I suppose I thought. He chuckled. How about you do another of your beautiful paintings, love? He gestured to my easel. I smiled at him. He always knew how to get away with things. But right now, I didn't mind at all. Time means little when you can live forever, so I was shocked when Edward said dinner. I didn't notice I was hungry till now. I nodded my head eagerly. HMM? What about barbecue welkers with vegetables and potatoes? Edward mused quietly to himself as he prepared the dinner. I stepped out to do some painting outside on the porch. To me the scenery was beautiful, the stars were visible tonight and the trees were deep and mysterious. It was the perfect spot. Only one thing was missing, a beautiful black panther relaxing in the grass. As if on cue, Edward came out where I was, a mischievous grin on his face. I heard you go outside, so I thought you would be in need of assistance. He gestured to his body. A black panther maybe? He trembled slightly, then he phased into a handsome black panther. His body shape was flawlessly curved and strong limbs were obvious by the muscularly front and hind legs. He was perfect. Most of the time I mainly painted animals. Edward always helped me, facing into one so I could paint him. It could have been an eagle, a tiger, snake, you see. He slinked up to me and I bent down to scratch behind his ears, his eyes closed and he purred softly. I stroked his cheek and whiskers. Where do I go? He purred in my head. I pointed to the middle of the clearing and explained, right in the middle there, try to act like you're relaxing or something peaceful. I nodded to him. Okay then, he said. He slyly stalked off to the middle of the clearing and sat down. He lifted his paw up and started cleaning himself with his pink tongue. Very good. I complimented his skills. He chuckled in my head and then I started my painting. I would occasionally do the outline of the picture before I would do any sort of painting. But tonight I just painted the whole thing. The mysterious lights in the sky covering the density of the forests, the dark grass swaying in the slight breeze of where the panther lay, its midnight black coat shimmering in the pale moonlight. Beneath the canvas I wrote in perfect handwriting. Beneath the midnight moonlight, the panther. Edward came up to me then when it was finished, I heard him gasp in my mind. Bella, that is so beautiful. You make everything seem alive and moving. I love the grass, it looks so real. Well done. Edward was still the Black Panther when I hung the painting on the corridor near the bathroom door. We stood back a little to admire the painting for a while. Edward made little noises of approval now and again. Suddenly Edward Panther was the real Edward and he grabbed my hand and ran to the kitchen. Dinner! I forgot the dinner. Edward screeched and ran around the kitchen like a madman, pulling dishes and pots from one oven to the other. I laughed at his face and helped him rub the rib sauce on the ribs with the brusher. We managed to get the food on the table without burning anything thanks to Edward's helpful cooking skills. The red wine was present on the grand dinner table but Edward quickly changed it to red grape juice, bless him. We managed to have a delicious dinner that night. I had a dream tonight. It was a good dream. It was about me and Edward choosing over the baby names. Normally my dreams come up with crazy names that pop up in my head and I would forget them the second I think them. I woke up to a bright light outside Edward and I's bedroom balcony. I moaned and shifted slightly. I suddenly realized I was sleeping on Edward's bare chest. I could feel his heartbeat by pressing my ear down on it. My hands were around his neck and his arms were around my waist. He was still sleeping, I was sure. His normal light snore was present and his slow, even breathing was low and steady. All my memories came flooding back to me and I was giddy. There would be a good chance that I would become a mother now, just as there would be a great chance for Edward being a father too. Edward started to wake up, his light snores had stopped and his hold on me tightened. His eyes fluttered open and I smiled on top of him, tracing the planes of his chest with my fingertips. Edward yawned hugely, showing off his perfect teeth. I chuckled, "Good morning, sleeping handsome." I mumbled, "Good morning, my sleeping beauty." He greeted me back. He leaned down to nuzzle his face in my hair. I sighed contently, resting my head against his neck. Edward suddenly started snoring again, rolling over so I toppled off him and onto the cold mattress. "Hey!" I complained when I grabbed the rest of the duvet Edward was taking all to himself. Edward rolled over again, but this time he rolled onto me. I grabbed his shoulders and pushed him down on the bed again. I trembled and phased into a gray cat. I should have known Edward wasn't really awake, because his eyes were tensed and not relaxed as a sleeping person's would be. I hissed at him, "Don't roll over again," I warned. I walked over to his chest, turning in circles to find the right spot to lie in. I patted the spot with my paw and sank down on it. Resting my head on my arms, I fell to a peaceful nap. EPOV. I watched the gray cat on me sleep peacefully. I didn't dare to wake the sweet angel. I already annoyed her by taking the bed covers, and otherwise she would bite my head off. I laughed quietly at myself. Of course Bella would never hurt me. Right then downstairs the front door burst open and a person came through the door. I panicked and carefully slid out of the bed, conspicuously sliding a hot water bottle under Bella so she wouldn't notice the temperature change. I got changed quickly and rushed downstairs, my shirt buttons only half done up and my trousers not pulled up to the waist. I rounded the corridor to see Emmett, Jasper, Alice and Rosalie admiring the painting Bella did last night. They jumped up when they saw me. Alice was the first to speak. "Hi Edward," she sang and hugged me round the waist. Rosalie looked uncomfortable but smiled at me. Her eyes looked annoyed. And Emmett and Jazz looked nervously at Rose, who stood back from everyone else. Hi Alice. I responded, distracted. Alice pretended she didn't notice. We saw this picture, she pointed to the painting. It's beautiful. That Black Panther sorta looks like you, I think I can tell. She gushed in wonder. I laughed while doing up my shirt. Alice, it is me. I laughed. I'll show you. I ran out to the clearing garden and phased into the Black Panther I was last night. I paced around for a while until I copied what I'd done in the picture. Alice gasped, "WOW, it is you. Look, Jazz. It's a panther." "Ooh." She rambled on. Jasper looked at me warily before he went up to me and patted my head. Me and these kind of forms make him a bit edgy. "Hey bro," he greeted me kindly, then went back to stand next to Alice protectively. I nodded at him and backed away from Emmett, who was running up to me. "No Edward," he yelled. "Hug time, lil bro." I sprinted away to the safety of the trees, hoping he wouldn't find me. His hugs are not comfortable. As I was running, I heard Bella in my thoughts. She must be waking up. "Edward, where are you?" she thought to me. I explained my situation. To my surprise, she didn't laugh. Instead, she urged me on to run. "Where?" I thought back. To the Cullens house, quick. "I'll be right behind you," she thought, and to my surprise again I felt her presence through the trees, moving quietly in parallel next to me. I raced faster towards the Cullens house when I heard Emmett's big booming laugh right behind me. "Hey Eddie boy, let me hug you." I stopped suddenly by the river and heard a big splash near the river. I looked up to see a very wet Emmett cursing very rude words as Em would kick him out the house for. I laughed in my head and heard Bella laughing too, right in my ear. My head snapped to the animal noise to see a beautiful black panther with great chocolate eyes that bored into mine. Her body was strong and fit with the lady kind of features to it. Her long tail swished and shone in the faint sun, and her face was stunning and mature, intelligent creature. Her head tilted to the side, one ear sticking up, and she murmured in my head, "We should get going now, Emmett's coming." She nodded to the water where Emmett fell in. A splashing Emmett was running towards us, growling playfully. I nodded and sprinted to the Cullen mansion. The door was open, so I jumped in. Carlisle looked up from his dense book, startled by the big animals coming into his home. Em screeched but relaxed when she saw it was just me and Bella. Bella hid behind the sofa and I crawled into the staircase basement room. We stayed absolutely still. Just as Carlisle closed the door, Emmett burst through yelling, "Eddie, why won't you let me hug you?" He yelled into the front room. "I'm your friend," he whined. "I won't break half of your bones on your right side like last time, I swear." He promised. "He did what last time?" Bella screeched in my head. "Bad experience with hugs with Emmett," I replied, wincing at the memory. "Emmett, maybe that's why Edward doesn't want any bone-crushing hugs," literally Carlisle said to Emmett. I snarled from the basement room in agreement. "There you are, Belle, see?" Emmett giggled from the other room. "Oh no, Edward, I don't want my bones to be crushed." Bella panicked. I leaped out from my hiding place and planted myself in front of Bella, who was cowering into the wall. I phased to my normal form and folded my arms against my chest. "Should I be worried that you're harassing my wife, Emmett?" I asked sarcastically. I felt Bella phase into her normal form behind me and wrapped her arms around my waist. Emmett's eyes bulged out, harassing. He raised his arms dramatically. "I just wanted to give you a hug, Eddie," he pouted and stomped outside in a very childish way. Carlisle chuckled quietly and went back to his thick book. Em smiled at us. "How's it going, you two?" she said, focusing her attention on me and Bella. Bella suddenly started bouncing in excitement. She rushed over to Em and gave her the biggest of hugs. "Oh Em," she sighed happily. Em looked surprised but responded with a tight squeeze. "What is it?" Carlisle looked up from his book. His eyes automatically cut to mine as in looking for an explanation. I just grinned at him. Em smiled gently, silently gesturing for Bella to carry on. Bella grabbed my hand and grinned at me, her eyes sparkling in anticipation. "Well, Em, Carlisle," Bella started. I was staring at her. She was so beautiful. I wondered what brought us together so perfectly. She was an angel. "MHMM?" Carlisle nodded. Em nodded too, a bit more eagerly. I could feel her excitement radiating off her. It coursed through my hand and traveled throughout my body. "I'm going to have a baby," Bella said. Her face was so joyous it nearly blinded me. Esm squealed. Yes, squealed and crushed Bella to her again. She knew Bella was just as desperate as her for having a baby. We were just a bit younger than Carlisle and had the same dreams any married couple had, a baby. Esm gushed. "We should get some things ready for him or her." "Oh. Is he a boy? A girl? How long are you?" "We should get a checkup." Carlisle gently nudged her. "Esm dear, calm down." He laughed. "Give the poor girl a break. She's having a mind overload." I studied Bella with alarmed eyes. "Mind what?" I quickly glanced at Carlisle. "No need to worry, son, I was just joking," he said seriously. He extended his arms towards Bella and hugged her in a fatherly way. "Congratulations, Bella." "Edward." She hugged him back fiercely. "Thanks, Dad." Bella sighed happily. Esm started her rambling again. "Bella, you need to get a checkup. Come with me." Esm grabbed her car keys and literally dragged Bella to the door. "We'll be back soon," she called from outside. Carlisle chuckled and focused his attention to me. "How are things, Edward?" he asked, setting his thick condensed book onto his lap. "Good. Well, today was great. It's not every day your wife comes running into your arms screaming that she's pregnant." I chuckled. Carlisle nodded with a big smile. "That must have been quite a surprise for you, I suppose." I nodded eagerly. Yes it was. BPOV. I waited nervously in the waiting room with Esm. So many questions clouded my mind. What if something goes wrong? What if I have a miscarriage? What if my baby dies, like Esm's? What if I'm not even pregnant? What if Edward changes his mind about making a family? What if Isabella Masson? The lady at the counter called out in a dry voice. "Dr. Phillips would like to see you now." Esm and I got up simultaneously and followed the lady at the counter out to the door that said Dr. Phillips 104, Baby and Amb. Mother Care. A woman in her mid-20s greeted us with a warm smile. "Hello, my name is Christy. Now, let's see this new baby." EPOV. 3 hours. They were gone for 3 hours. Jasper got a call from Alice, saying she went shopping with Bella and Esm, which was half an hour ago. I was sort of hoping she would have vision then tell me what gender the baby is. I guess that's out of my hopes. I was relentless, pacing across the living room where Emmett, Rosalie, Jasper and Carlisle were also waiting. What if something horrible happened? Is that why they've been out for so long? My heart picked up pace as I considered the possibilities. In the other room, Jasper groaned. "Edward, stop. Your moods are so unnecessary. Stop worrying for once," he shouted from the other room. The door slammed shut, sounding Jasper's departure. I sighed and walked into the living room. Emmett and Rosalie were sitting together on the love seat and Carlisle was reading his medical book. They all looked up when I came in. Emmett grinned, though Rosalie didn't say anything. "Hey bro, what you worrying about so much that made Jazz leave?" I could hear the curious in his words, though Emmett visibly looked relaxed and quite huge. I sighed and flopped down on the nearest chair. "I don't know, Em." I ran my hand over my face. "You saw the time. It's late." "Too late. And what if something happened to them? What if something happened to Bella?" A deep shudder and pricks ran through me and I fought to stop facing. "Whoa, dude, you really are in deep shit, aren't you?" Emmett low whistled, earning a smack from Rosalie. "You're annoying me." "I'm trying to paint my nails, for God's sake," she snarled. "Sorry, Rosie," Emmett mumbled. Carlisle stopped reading and spoke for the first time in the conversation. "Edward, you have to get used to the fact that when Alice shops a long time, son." Carlisle looked pointedly at the clock. An hour had passed. I moaned and rested my head on the chair, succumbing to a peaceful nap. 2 hours later, Emmett, Carlisle gone hunting. Ring. 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 I jumped, shocked from my sleep by the high-pitched ringing of my phone. Ring. 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 "Well, are you going to get it or what?" I heard Rosalie's voice. It might be B. I quickly snatched up the phone. "Hello, Edward?" "Oh, Edward." I heard my sweet angel. Relief flooded through me as I heard her beautiful voice. "Bella," I breathed. "Edward, I want to go home," my Bella moaned. "What's wrong?" I panicked. Alice, she mumbled in annoyance. Hey, I heard that. Alice's voice yelled in the distance. I chuckled, but annoyed that it was Alice who was making Bella irritated. Where are you? I paced around the room again. I'm a designer's shop. It's in Italian so I can't read the name. I stopped pacing and frowned. What are you doing there? Getting cute little clothes for the Twioops. Twi? What's a twi? It's supposed to be a surprise. Surprise? I'll tell you anyway. Okay, Edward? Yes, love? I said cautiously. We're having twins. Bella squealed excitedly. Twins. I heard Rosalie grit her teeth when a big smile spread across my face. What gender? I asked eagerly. Both. I could almost visualize Bella jumping up and down. Both? Like a girl and a boy? My voice rising in excitement as well. Yes. Bella said. Wow, love, it's amazing. How far along are we? Only 2 months. I was due to be in 4 months' time. I had to sit down, otherwise I might have fallen over. 4 months. 4 months was only a little time. In 4 months I would be a father. Okay, love, I'll see you when you get back in 30 minutes. Tops. Hurry back to me. Always. I hung up the phone with a grin on my lips. 30 minutes. I looked back to Rosalie. She was glaring at me. My smile faded. I hate this. I hate you. She snarled before she sprung at me. BPOV. Finally. I thought in relief as Alice and Esm both put the shopping in the car. The shopping filled half the car, so Alice had to squeeze in the back seat while Esm drove and I sat in the passenger seat. In seconds we were speeding down the highway back to Forks. I couldn't stay still. I was so excited for Edward to see the baby ultrasound pictures. They were so beautiful. Though tiny, they had a lot of features already. I sighed, but it came out in a squeal. Esm hugged me sideways when there was a traffic light. Oh Bella. I'm so happy for you. She sniffed. I patted her back. Esm, I'm just happy that I get to be a mother, and Edward will be a father. You know he really wants to be a father? We always wanted to raise a child, but now I conceive twins. I really wanted to tell him in person, so I could see his face. I looked at Alice. She was staring at me in shock. You told him? She screeched. I flinched and looked at my hands. Yeah, but not about the pictures. I quickly added when Alice glared at me. She sighed in defeat. Fine, but remember not to. Alice trailed off, her eyes distant, and she swayed a little. I quickly sat next to her to control her balance. Her distant blank eyes changed to horror and she gasped. It was a broken, half-choked sound. What? What, Alice? I growled. EDD ward. Alice mumbled into my shirt, sobbing quietly. Silence. It felt as if I was on fire. My body burned in anguish and I whimpered against the fiery tortures that scorched me in pain. Edward. Edward. No, 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 no. I couldn't help it. I was going to change. In the car, I leapt out the door and bolted into the trees. The prickly pins were as painful as ever. I screamed and I exploded into a lioness. Edward, 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 no. Alice suddenly appeared at my side. Bella. She yelled and gripped my fur. I slumped to the ground. Bella, come on. We need to go home. Home to Edward. He's in trouble. She yanked on me again. I hit my head on a tree, making it snap and fall. How could I be so stupid? Edward is in trouble and I'm just laying here. I got up and sprinted to the way home, leaving Alice behind. APOV. I watched Bella run away. That was more like it, I thought. I pulled out my cell and dialed Carlisle's number. He picked up on the first ring. What's wrong, Alice? He asked. Carlisle, get to the house. I think Rosalie and Edward are fighting. Rosalie took him off guard and I swallowed. Where are you, Alice? In the forest. Bella's going to the house as I speak, so is SM. They'll be there in 10 minutes. Okay, Alice, I have Emmett and Jasper here with me. They're running to the house now. Tell them to hurry, I whispered. Edward's not doing so well. And with that I ran after Bella back to the house. Full sprint. EPOV. I was so stupid to use telekinesis while fighting. Now I'm as weak as ever and can hardly phase, let alone fight. Great idea, Edward, I thought sarcastically. Rosalie threw me into the wall. crashing Esm's collection of plates on the mantelpiece. Blood wheezed out from my cut in my arm and it hurt like hell. Rosalie stalked towards me, her black eyes were hungry. She sprang at me but I quickly rolled over, causing her to crash into the wall. The glass pieces flew everywhere. "Rosalie," I whispered. All I heard was a growl. Rosalie clawed at my torso, making me bleed more. God, it hurt. "Rosalie, stop!" I screamed. "Stop!" I choked as she gripped my throat. Black spots were clouding my vision and I couldn't see. My hands reached out to her hand and I twisted it, breaking her bones and making her hiss. "Bastard," she snarled and kicked me into the wall. I tasted something warm and runny in my mouth. I spat and red blood dripped to the floor. I saw her coming again and dodged, grabbing her arms and pulling it over her head. A metallic screech echoed through her snarls and screams. I threw her limbs behind me and moved out of the way as she came at me. I gasped my breath through my teeth. The pain was getting less and less bearable to fight through. Rosalie was obviously getting annoyed. However, the loss of 2 arms were not forever for vampires. They could just put themselves back together. Sort of like Humpty Dumpty, but more advanced. I looked up, but it was too late. "You think you're so special? Stupid purebred," she spat before something came in contact with my wounded chest. Everything went black. JPOV. Emmett and I raced straight for home when Carlisle got the phone call about Edward and Rosalie. Carlisle reached us in a matter of seconds. He was fast, probably as fast as Edward, but he never bragged. I could feel Emmett's concern and worry for Rosalie, but also for Edward. Who knows who could have gotten hurt, the shapeshifter or the vampire? We met Esm and Alice along the way, so we both ran straight for the house. A huge lioness appeared from the trees as well. Bella. Her pain was so bewildering it took me off guard and I stumbled. Someone grabbed my hand. I looked down into the beautiful eyes of my darling. It took me a while to notice her eye held pain. Her mood was anxious. It made me on my guard too. "Come on, Jazz," she whispered, sprinting along again. Lioness Bella changed back into normal Bella and she ran in lead. We all could hear her sobs when we neared the house. The scent of blood was not to be missed. It was Edward's blood. Growls erupted from the house as we all filed in. It was a mess, a total destruction. A one-armed Rosalie was stalking a heap of blood and ripped clothes near the edge of the wall. It took us a while to realize what it was. We all froze. "Edward!" Bella screamed and ran over to him. He lied still on the floor, his bloody chest rising and flailing at the motion of his breath. Bella cupped his cheek with her hand and sobbed into him. "No, no, no. Edward, please. Dee, don't come on, love, wake up," she cried, shaking him. Emmett got hold of Rosalie and took her outside while Carlisle rushed over to Edward, horror-stricken. "Esm dear, get me a towel please. Alice, stay with Bella, and Jasper go try and calm Rosalie down." I nodded and rushed outside to where Emmett was trying to calm the person who nearly tried to kill her own brother. I tried to give off a wave of calm towards the struggling murderer. She relaxed but hissed at me, him and his mate. She screeched, "They have to take my chance away from me." Rosalie screamed and struggled against Emmett's vice hold. I sent another wave of calm towards her. She stopped the struggling and screaming but still cursed out. I sighed. This isn't going to work. You got to take her away somewhere for a while. Calm her down." I glanced swiftly at Emmett. He looked upset. Will Edward be okay?" I saw a lot of blood. As Emmett's mood changed to one of afraid, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. We would all be devastated if Edward is, and Bella, Bella is his mate, she would probably die as well. To make it even worse, she is pregnant for Hitler's sake. I shook my head to clear the thought. "See you soon, Emmett." I saluted him before running back to the house. The smell of blood was not like a human's. If it were, I would have lost control the second I smelled this bloodbath. No, it was much more animal-ish appealing, but durable to get used to. I walked over to where my darling Alice was comforting Bella, her slender arms wrapped round Bella's waist and her hand patting her back in a friendly gesture. "It's going to be alright, Bella. He's going to be alright. It's going to be alright," my sweet Alice murmured to Bella, repeating. Edward really looked terrible. His chest was shredded, and not nearly all the way. Otherwise he would have been dead by now. His neck was badly bruised. Purple spots was dominant there. It looked like someone stained purple ink on it. Edward's arms was scratched and gashes were at every angle of his skin, clothes were ripped and torn, his hair looked unnaturally messy than before, blood dried to it, making the color of his hair a little weird. "Oh God," I murmured as I sat next to Alice. Alice scowled at me. "Please Jazz, try to make sure your comments don't affect poor Bella, I can hardly control her as it is," she whispered frantically. I mimed zipping my lips together and throwing away the key. "I'll try to keep my remark to the minimum." I bowed my head in respect. Bella looked empty. Her brown eyes held no excitement or even life. They still held the love I saw when she looked at Edward, but they were blank, empty. All what was left was pain. Esm looked nearly as worried as Bella. "Why won't he open his eyes, dear?" Esm asked Carlyle desperately. Carlyle stayed calm, though I saw a flash of distress. "Simply because it all depends on how badly he is injured. If someone gets knocked out they stay unconscious, the time depending on how badly he was hurt. And in this case I assume that this will be quite long." He trailed off when he saw Bella's murderous expression. Her feelings were so strong I could not help but let out a small snarl. "She shit that murderer!" Bella screamed, standing up and shaking uncontrollably. "That bitch!" she snarled, glaring at the door where Emmett and Rosalie walked in. Oh great, Emmett had to choose the right time to walk in, with Rosalie as well. Rosalie glared at Bella, though she was being hidden by a suddenly protective Emmett. "Who you calling a bitch? Daughter of a beast," she sneered at her, making Bella's anger rise dramatically. "And soon becomes a mother of a beast, though I'm sure you'll kill that thing inside you before it has any time to live anyway," she continued carelessly. Esm gasped. "Rosalie!" Her eyes furious, Bella let out a high-pitched scream of a snarl. "You don't call my babies that," she growled. Ruled by instincts I stepped in front of Alice, hiding her from their view. I received a little huff in annoyance. Bella ran at Rosalie, but was stopped by Emmett. He grabbed her shoulders and made sure she did not get away. Bella continued to struggle. I tried to make her calm. That made no difference. She was out of control. "Let me go, I want to murder her," she screamed and scratched at Emmett's muscled arms. I helped Emmett up by grabbing her arms in a tight grip, though Bella continued to struggle. "Jazz, let go!" Bella screamed. But her screams were showing her helplessness. Her hot tears streamed down her cheeks. "No Bella, you need to calm down." She shook her head. "No, no, no. She hurt him. She nearly killed him. I can't just let that slip." "You know I can't," she cried. This was unhealthy. For someone who was pregnant, Bella should not be going through this. "Bella," I said quietly. She looked up angrily. "Would Edward want you to do this?" "In your state personally I think he would have had a heart attack," I said truthfully. Bella shook her head again. "No, he would want to do it himself," she cried. "But he can't, so I'm doing it for him." Bella sagged onto the floor and broke down. Esm hugged her and held her tight. "Bella dear, it's alright," Esm cooed, rocking Bella backwards and forwards like a child. "It's alright when I have Edward," Bella complained stubbornly. Esm stroked her cheek in a motherly way. "Dear, you do have Edward, right over there." Esm pointed to the crumpled heap under Carlyle. "Barely." "Yes, but be grateful he is still alive." "I know." "Patience, Bella. I have very little. I just want my Edward back." "BPOV." "Alice, it's gone 5 minutes," I confirmed, staring at the clock. We were all here apart from Rosalie and Edward and I's house. Edward was lying on the couch near the fireplace. His washed hair shone from the dim, gold glow of the light. It had been a day and Edward was nearly healed. Carlyle had changed his clothes to a cleaner wherein Esm had washed his wounded face so all the blood came off. Jasper was sitting in the chair opposite me with Alice at his feet. Emmett sat next to Jasper with his hands behind his head and Carlyle and Esm sat next to him. I gently pulled my shaking hand through his beautiful hair. Why wouldn't he wake up? I thought. Jasper, feeling my distress, answered in a grave tone. "Bella, it's alright, stop stressing yourself over this, it's not healthy." I felt a wave of calm crash over me, but I didn't accept it. How could I be calm in a situation like this? "Alice," I whispered hoarsely, staring at Edward again. 10 seconds. I heard her chirpy voice sing. I counted down from 10 in my head. 0. "Alice, he's not." I stopped short when I saw Edward's hand twitch slightly, his eyes fluttered and squinted open. I sighed in relief. "Hey." Eddie boy's awake. Emmett yelled. We all smiled as we heard Edward's chuckle. Okay, this wasn't the best waking up experience, but anyway, he teased, sitting up. He looked at me and our eyes connected. All the pain and worry that I'd felt all quickly evaporated into the air. Love and desire bubbled up inside of me, and before I knew it, I was attacking my lips to his. My hands moved to his hair, stroking it, while he placed his hands on my waist, pulling me closer. Get a room, Emmett called from behind me. I pulled back and snarled quietly. Shut up, Emmett. Emmett laughed. Esm and Carlisle both smiled and hugged Edward softly. Good night, dears, Esm said, and both her and Carlisle sprinted out of the house. Jasper and Alice were soon out with Emmett and me, and Edward finally had our alone time. He touched his forehead to mine and whispered, Bella, I am so sore. I silenced him by putting a finger over his lips. You don't have to apologize. It is not your fault Taffet butchered you. It is all her fault, Edward. Not yours, so please don't say sorry. I stared into his stunning emerald eyes. He sighed and nodded. I promise, Bella. He removed my finger from his mouth. He kissed it before he brought it to his cheek. I know it is not in my place to apologize for this. I have so many things on my mind, love. It gets a bit disorientating. I couldn't wait to see you when I knew you were coming back. My mind was filled by fantasies of becoming a father. I was overwhelmed in a good way. And when you finished twins. We were having twins. I guess from there I couldn't hold it in anymore, and well, I suppose someone didn't like my reaction. I flinched while he continued. I was off guard. She took me by surprise and I was too slow. Mainly because I used my stupid, no-good, utterly reckless telekinesis powers in instinct. He growled in frustration. You'll get better, I insisted. He looked confused, inhaling. Obviously I grinned. He grinned back. And I'll be right back to your loving, handsome husband who you dearly love in no time. My love. Edward flashed his teeth before pulling me back in for another kiss for the night. BPOV. It had been a week since the incident and Edward was healed. I was starting to get the baby bump faster than usual, and so Alice and Esm had to go out and buy new clothes for me. I was grateful that Esm took it easy on me and didn't buy the most outrageous clothing like Alice does. In no time I had a wardrobe full with maternity outfits, but I mainly wore my adjustable loose pants with a baggy but fashionable top. I realized that this pregnancy wasn't going to be a normal one. It was much faster. In the 3rd week I was already going to the toilet more times than usual. The baby bump was huge and I was getting all these weird cravings, especially raw meat. I don't think there was any other time I loved raw meat till now. It was so desirable one time that I had to send Edward out the house to hunt down some elk for me. The elk meat was the best. I had countless mood swings, which was really starting to piss me off. I already screamed at Edward for drinking my tea again, which was really a dumb thing to be pissed off at. But Edward always understood. He was downright shocked, I'll tell you that, but he always forgave me too much. The end of the holidays for Forks High School had ended, and soon Alice, Jasper, Emmett and Rosalie were attending it. When they were gone, Edward and I went to visit the main house where Esm and Carlisle eagerly awaited our return. Rosalie was in a vexed mood and didn't want to speak to either me or Edward. She refused to go to school, but in the end, Emmett persuaded her to go. Edward seemed to forgive her for nearly killing him, and I had no idea why he did that. He had said he understood her situation. Flashback. She's jealous, Bella. Edward stared at me with his beautiful, intelligent eyes. I frowned at the sky. Jealous? Rosalie? I questioned him doubtfully. He nodded. Yes, jealous because she knows we can do something that she can't. I believe from experience that if you want something that you are sure you can never get, it makes you feel desperate. He stared at me, his emerald eyes scorched under his lashes. I believe that is what Rosalie is feeling every time she looks at us. She has a bit of a temper, love. That was why she acted so rash. To hide her pain, he caught my stare and smiled warmly. I smiled back and crossed my arms over my big bulge. What? So when did you turn into a Jasper, huh? I snorted. He just laughed. And a flashback. We were heading over to the Cullens now. Edward insisted to carry me, but I didn't want to look helpless and big. But I really couldn't resist to a bronze-colored horse. His eyes were his normal ones as usual. We pick up our normal traits to our animal ones, Emerald. All you need to do now is hop on, Lovey thought to me. I'd never ridden a horse before, but riding Edward seemed easy and fun. I couldn't help but giggle as I sat on Edward's rear. I felt the vibrations move throughout his body as he huffed. Feeling a bit happy today now, love? He chuckled in my head. I slapped him slightly. Shut up, I mumbled and combed my fingers through his mane. Edward moved at a pace no faster than a graceful trot, and we were going up the Cullens driveway in a few minutes. I saw Esm come out of the house with a flower pot in her hands. She smiled at Edward and I as we. Well, Edward trotted up to her. Well, good morning, Esm, I greeted her, still on the back of Edward the horse. She had the look of admiration in her butterscotch eyes. Oh, good morning to you too, dear. Edward, she nodded at Edward and patted his neck. How was your night? Pleasant, thank you. Edward neighed. Esm looked sheepishly at him. Tell her I said my night was peaceful. I nodded and looked back at the confused Esm. He said his night was peaceful, I translated. Esm's confused face relaxed into understanding and she smiled again. All is well. Oh, I almost forgot. Are you too hungry? She hit her hand on her forehead for being so stupid. I quickly shook my head. We just had breakfast, Esm. No worries, I grinned. Edward's stomach rumbled and I blushed. Well, I think this boy here fancies some delicious, lush, green grass, huh? I patted Edward's neck. He neighed in excitement. I sat in a garden chair watching Esm plant her favorite flowers in their neatly made beds. I traced pictures on the thin material that covered my huge belly, thinking, Bella? I heard Esm's worried voice in front of me. I jumped a bit, startled at how close her face was. Bella dear, are you alright? You wouldn't respond. She leant back. I blinked twice before responding. Sorry, Esm, I guess I just zoned out a bit on you. You were saying? I cocked my head to the side. Esm got back to her gardening. Oh, I was saying you should probably get another checkup, dear. She nodded to herself. Because you're awfully big, she laughed quietly. I frowned slightly. No, I can't, Esm. The doctors might freak out when they see me now. My babies grow fast. I patted my bloated stomach with a grin. Maybe Carlisle might help? I should go see him. Where is he anyway? I couldn't sense his presence in the house. Maybe he went hunting. Esm shook her head. Oh, no dear, he's at work and won't be back till late. She picked out a few weeds from a flower bed. I sighed, resented into lounging back onto the garden chair. How's your house coming? Esm picked up conversation lightly. Everything's great, Esm. All the baby's nursery is complete. Well, all what we need now are these two angels. I rubbed my belly softly. Did I tell you? Emmett broke another of the Wii remotes yesterday morning. I scowled at the grass. Esm gasped. Oh God, no one told me. He needs some scolding straight away. I'm terribly sorry, dear. He'll pay for it, I'm certain. Esm's eyes were fierce. I smiled, grateful. Thanks, Esm. Oh. My hand flew to my stomach when I felt a rather hard kick in my belly. Bella, Bella. Edward's frantic voice rang over Esm's. Bella love, what is it? I heard your cry. Edward cupped my face in his hands. His eyes were worried. As he spoke, another lighter kick responded. I gasped and silent tears ran down my face. Bella. Edward wiped the tears away with his hands. Bella love, are you smiling? He stared at me with a confused expression spread all over his face. Esm walked up to me and put her hand lightly on my arm. Darling, what is it? I didn't respond, but I showed them. I grabbed both of Esm's and Edward's hands and placed them on my stomach. They were both obviously confused. I hummed quietly and quite soon felt another kick. I looked up at their faces and stifled a giggle. They both obviously felt it too. Oh my God, Edward mumbled and he placed both of his hands over the baby bump more like a baby hill. They like your voice, you know, I told him softly. He stared into my eyes. They love their mummy's voice as well. He grinned crookedly. I rolled my eyes. Esm looked like she was about to cry. Oh Bella. She cried and hugged me tightly, nudging Edward out of the way. I'm so happy for you. I laughed. Wasn't you supposed to say that when I first get pregnant? I joked. Esm smiled. It was instinct. You tend to get emotional when you first feel your little baby kick, huh? Esm sighed. Her distant eyes were remembering her old past. Yeah, I agreed half-heartedly. It is truly a miracle, isn't it? I whispered, staring up at Edward again. He caressed my cheek. Couldn't agree more. Love. APOVE. I squealed in Rosalie's red BMW. I couldn't stop bouncing. I was so excited. Rosalie sighed from the driver's seat. God, Alice, be quiet, she muttered, flicking her hair behind her shoulder. Emmett imitated her voice at me. Yeah, Alice, no need to get hyped up. He retrieved a slap from Rosalie with that. I growled at him. We are so getting the cutest pet for the school competition, I stated confidently in Jasper's lap. Jess sighed. We don't even know if they'll want to do it anyway. For one, Bella obviously can't face and Edward probably wouldn't want to leave her side. I thought aloud. Alice glared at me adorably. Well, I do know, I'm the sidekick here, you know. She touched her forehead. I grinned and kissed her cheek. Yes, I do know. I can't believe that Forks doesn't have any pet shops. I mean, no wonder everyone around here is so miserable. Alice threw her hands up in frustration. I and Emmett chuckled. Seattle has loads, Port Angeles has barely two. Alice exclaimed. Really? Emmett jumped, making the car shake. I thought they had none. He laughed. Yeah, that's why the principal had to provide the students with stray cats from the pound in Seattle. Rosalie wrinkled her nose. I would rather prefer a cat really, but I guess we could have a dog. She shrugged. I and Emmett gaped at her. What? You're not the only ones who want a nice pet to show off, she defended herself. I nodded. We're going to let Edward be a brown border collie, those are the cutest. I got a vision of everyone gaping at our fluffy friend and grinned. Emmett whooped. Yes. We'll name him Eddie. Emmett bounced. We all laughed. Even Rosalie cracked a smile. We arrived at the main house quickly and I threw myself out of the still-moving car and ran into the living room where Edward was snoozing, drawled lazily out on the chair. Bella was in the kitchen, probably looking after her cravings. I jumped on Edward's chair and screamed, Wake up! Wake up! Wake up! Wake up! I screamed. Everyone came rushing in. Bella had a frying pan in her hands. Emmett, Rosalie and Jazz laughed. What? What's going on? Bella and Esm panicked. Edward jumped up, his clothes creased. Well, why is everyone here? And why is Alice jumping on me? He rubbed his eyes. I giggled, and shook my head. I wanted to tell you something, Eddie. I stifled a smile. Edward scowled at me. Don't call me Eddie. I just nodded and faced Esm and Bella, who looked confused. Sorry for the screaming, Esm, I mumbled. I was just excited about school tomorrow. Bella put her frying pan down. And why would you be excited? For school? Bella looked skeptically at me. Because we are going to take your husband to school with us as a dog, for competition. I clapped. No, because our little Eddie is so tame we don't need any cages or stuff like that. But we will need a leash, a pink Oneno Greeno. Hold up, Alice. What competition? Edward demanded. And why a dog? I sighed and told him everything about the school competition. Please, Edward, I tried my puppy dog face that breaks Jasper's heart. He shook his head. No, Alice, you will not make me. I am not doing this. The next day, I can't believe I'm doing this, Edward thought to me. You will pay, Alice, I swear to God. I smirked as I put Edward's brown collar on. You are not putting me on a leash, he panicked, his fluffy ears flattened against his head. I shook my head. No, of course not, Eddie Weddy, I cooed, he growled. Emmett laughed from the driver's seat. We were taking Emmett's Jeep. Rosalie didn't want any mud crap on her baby. Eddie was sitting on the seat opposite side of Jasper and I leaned back from hooking the collar on place. Sounds like someone doesn't like you, Alice. Emmett grinned. I pouted. Eddie fidgeted with the collar on his neck. I panicked. Did I put it on too tight? I asked the brown dog in front of me. Eddie looked up and shook his head. I sighed in relief. Suddenly Emmett snorted. Ha! Look at Mike Newton with his border terrier. He's got no control over his pet. He pointed out the window where a panting Mike tried to catch his small dog he obviously got from the pound. Eddie barked in laughter and we all joined in. Due to Emmett's beating, we were there in no time. We parked the car in a 2-car space. A sign in the front of the school caught our eye. It read, May all pets be on a leash at all times. The competition will take place after lunch. Please take your pets into the school gym locker rooms where they will be kept. Thank you. Uh-oh. Sorry, Eddie. You gotta be on a leash. Emmett ruffled Eddie's head. No, Eddie moaned in our heads. I pranced forward with a brown leash in my hand and tied it to Eddie's collar. Eddie whined in annoyance and slumped down, resting his head on his paws. I'm not going, he said stubbornly in our hands. Come on man, be strong, eh? Jasper knelt to face Eddie. Just for today, Alice will bother me for forever if you don't do this, he begged. I gasped and pouted, even though it was true. Eddie whined and got to his feet, shaking off the rain from the drizzle. Let's go. I squealed and bounded off to the gym. Jasper followed close behind and Emmett and Rosalie stood on one side of Eddie. Emmett held the leash. We got in the gym. There were not many pits here. We were early, so not much students were here. Most of the pits were in cages and holders. There was one person who I suspected was the person who looked after the animals. Rosalie walked up to him. When he took her in, his eyes bulged and we all heard his heart pick up pace. Emmett growled quietly. Eddie bit his leg to calm him down. Excuse me, do you know where we can keep our dog? We don't want a cage. Rosalie smiled. The man's eyes raked over Rosalie's mini skirt. His mouth linked when his eyes rested on her chest. Fuck. Emmett suddenly swore. He jumped up and down, transferring the pervert's gaze from Rosalie. What? Jasper hissed. Emmett stopped bouncing. The dog bit me, he mumbled, but when the man turned his back he shot a murderous glare at him. Oh, over there, he stuttered, pointing to an empty space near the wall. Eddie cringed. Not there. It stinks of crap. Seriously, don't you smell it? He thought to all of us, barking at the space. The man looked at Eddie. Your dog a bit claustrophobic? He joked, but paled in fear when Eddie growled a menacing bark at him. Jasper whispered to Eddie. Calm down bro, we're trying to make a good reputation. He sent a wave of calm over everyone. It helped and Eddie relaxed. Rosalie walked over to Eddie's space and tapped her foot. Come over here then, you all are sitting ducks, she complained. We got to the corner space and I pulled out a doggy tent. It set up on its own and I got out a bowl and Eddie's meat from the rucksack I stored in the Jeep's boot. The man gaped at us. What? We came prepared. I rolled my eyes and grabbed Jasper's hand. Come on guys, we're going to be late for home class, I called as Jazz and I ran human pace to class. Bye Eddie. We called as we made our way out. Our response was a bark. APOV. How long till lunch is over, Alice? Emmett grumbled, staring at the plate of a bagel he destroyed. 5 minutes, I said, pinching apart my slice of pizza from the cafeteria. We'll get there early, as usual. I rolled my eyes. Jasper chuckled under me. Let's just hope our little Eddie didn't scare that poor man to death. Emmett scowled at the wall. I wouldn't mind if he did, he muttered darkly. I slapped him on the arm. The contact made a cracking noise. Emmett. I gasped. These are innocent human lives. And you just want to dispose of them because you're a bit pissed off that one unfortunate soul just happened to be drawn by Rosalie's beauty. A beauty all vampires have. I hissed, holding my fist to his pathetic face. Jasper cuddled me back into his arms, spreading a silent wave of calm over everyone. Now, beautiful soul. His southern accent was leaking into his words. Peace, calm down my angel. His touch made the effect of calming stronger. I closed my eyes and relaxed against his safety of his arms. Sorry I mumbled quietly, just hit a nerve you know. I've never remembered anything about being human. My voice got muffled as Jasper tightened his hold on me. No harm done, Alice, Emmett replied. Rosalie sighed. How long now, Alice? She asked. I suddenly lurched from Jasper's arms with a wide grin. The bell would go in exactly 32 EPOV. I barked at the man who stood outside my pen. His gaze cut to me. I pointed to the clock at the other side of the wall with my nose. The tiny clock was difficult to see, especially if you're on the exact far side of the room. What does it do? Oh. The time? You wanna know the time, doggy? Huh? He smiled, his eyes crinkling from the effort for doing so. I barked. Well, he continued. His eyes were filled with that kind of look when teenagers first get the new all so cute little puppy from the magazines. The time is dinner time. Eat up. He threw a plastic bone inside the pen. I stared blankly at him. Was this person serious? The man frowned at the plastic germ-infected bone he threw at me. He pulled a disgusting dildo out from the jeans pocket. Where was this man getting these things from? I thought, is this even legal? He threw it at the wall. I just stared at it like the second one. This man needed to get himself a girlfriend. How did he even get? Come on doggy, get the dick. He clapped, supporting me. I growled quietly, my ears flattened against my head. The man still urged me on. I barked at the clock again. The man stopped talking and glanced at the clock. The time? He asked curiously. I nodded eagerly. He glanced at the clock again, his eyes widened. Shit, need to get these animals ready before lunch ends, he muttered. Come on doggy. He climbed over my pen and tied my leash to my collar. He done the same to the other dogs that were here. 2 ladies took the cats in their cages and the rest of the dogs. We were led around the back of the school. There was equipment set up in the grassy area and we had to sit in a group next to it. The cats were placed on a fancy table. Their high-pitched meows were so annoying I understood why normal dogs chased after them. A big banner was raised for all to see. How trained is your pet? It read. I grinned. So this was a training competition. Dogs and cats out there, I am so going to floor this. I looked over my shoulder to see that man staring at me weirdly. I rolled on the floor and barked, masking it. It worked. He turned back around. That was a close APOV. As soon as the bell rang we were out the door, standing in front of the gym doors. The students behind us ran as well. Humans running, compared to a vampire, was like a tortoise racing against a cheetah. 2 girls pushed past everyone and yanked on the handles. It wouldn't budge. What the hell? One of the girls yelled, banging their fist on the wall. Open up. My kitty Snowball is in there. I turned around sharply to Emmett and Rosalie. Why didn't I see this? I hissed, my hands balling into fists. What if they took Edward? Oh God, Bella's going to kill us. I hid my face in my hands in frustration. Emmett frowned. No Alice, he was interrupted by a loudspeaker from the building. The pet competition has been moved to the space behind Block B. Thank you. I immediately jumped and yelled, everybody go behind Block B. I grabbed Jasper's hand and dashed to Block B. The students followed suit. We were welcomed by numerous barks. The dogs were jumping excitedly when they saw their owners and the cats meowed impatiently. I spotted Eddie. He was the only one who wasn't jumping up and down and barking. He was pacing in front of the cat's cage, cringing every time a cat meowed. I started to run to him but a teacher stopped me. I looked up reluctantly to the eyes of Miss Harrison. She faked a smile at me. Oh, no you don't. The students wait there. She pointed to a row of badly laid out chairs from our classes. I huffed and slumped down on one. The rest of the students sat down and it was all silent. Miss Harrison stepped forward. Welcome students to the annual pet competition. As we all know, this is tested for how trained your pet is and how smart. She smirked at the children when they all groaned. So we will all begin by calling your dog or cat by their names and let them come to you. This will be tested for how responsive they are. She let the students line up in a line going horizontal. We were facing the cats and dogs. We will start from the first, working to the left. She waved her hand, signaling us to begin. Tyler was first to step up to the plate. He called his dog, Rover. Here Rover. Come here boy. He cooed, slapping his thighs to get the dog's attention. I saw the blood rush up to his cheeks as he blushed in embarrassment. Rover seemed to recognize his name and he sprinted to his owner and leapt into his arms. His big tongue swept over his face. Well done Tyler. Miss Harrison congratulated. Go sit over there with Rover. She pointed to the seats. Tyler nodded and led his dog away. A few more people took their turns. Most of their dogs thought that the female pooch was the most interesting thing in the space they were in. Tim. Boy, come here. A hopeless owner failed to get their pet to recognize him. Most of them were from the pound anyway. Friend. Another cat owner tried to catch their cat that was being chased by a dog. Okay, Alice Cullen, you're next. She called out. I squealed and stepped forward. I spotted Eddie staring at me, just like all the students around me. He had his tongue draped lazily on the side of his mouth. Should I run to you? Eddie thought to me. I shook my head. Walk to me, Eddie, I said, and loud enough so Miss Harrison could hear as well. Eddie walked towards me gracefully. He didn't bark very loud, only a little rumble in his chest. By the time he was next to me he sat down obediently and allowed me to tie his leash on his collar. Miss Harrison exploded into applause. Thank you, thank you. I know I'm fantastic, right? Eddie thought to me smugly. I pulled the leash sharply. "Oh, shut up, Eddie," I mumbled. I curtsied and sat down next to my family. Jasper pulled me onto his lap and Eddie jumped into Emmett's lap, probably just a dog instinct. "Well done, Alice, Eddie, a true leadership," she gushed. I thanked her wholeheartedly, giving Emmett a high five. It continued on like that for the rest of the school's hours. We took it in turns. Obviously, Rosalie was with Eddie, and so was Emmett and Jasper. Just like I had seen, we all passed the competitions. Miss Harrison loved Emmett's enthusiasm, Rosalie's strictness, Jasper's patience, and my determination. Jasper says I'm a natural force though. We finished late. About 3:50 I was walking back to the Jeep when I was pulled into a vision. We were just coming in out the car door when I heard Bella yell from the inside of the house. "Alice Cullen, you are so late. It's been more than half an hour. You are so dead." Future me shivered and whispered, "OHCRAP, Alice?" A distant voice said somewhere. My mind came back to the present and I was taken straight to Jasper's worried gaze. "Alice, what did you see?" he asked. "Jazz, we got to get home now." I flashed to the Jeep. They were all in already. "What is it, Alice?" Rosalie asked from the passenger seat. I sat down agitatedly. I had a vision of Balash was so angry when we came home late. I glanced at Eddie. He whined and hid his head in his brown paws. "Bella is not the best person to be around if she's angry at you," Eddie told all of us. Emmett was speeding. This time it was essential. When Bella gets mad, he trailed off, shaking his head. Jasper was literally biting his nails from all the nervous emotions. I took his hand from his mouth and held it in my own. "Calm, Jazz," I whispered. Suddenly Edward's normal voice broke the silence. I looked back to see the shapeshifter in his normal form again. "Should I call her?" He began to search for his phone. I was quickly shown another vision. It was future Edward talking to Bella. "2 minutes, love, I promise," he said into the speaker. "Okay, Edward, hurry back to me. I love you." "Love you too." Future Edward snapped the phone shut and looked at me. "That went well," he grinned. It blurred out to let in another vision. Future Edward came out of the Jeep to let Bella jump in his arms. "Edward," she squealed. Future Bella stepped back and glanced at her watch. "On time, as usual." She grinned. "Should I?" Edward called me from my visions. I stared at him in shock. "Yes." I screamed at him, raising my arms up in frustration. "What are you waiting for?" He quickly latched onto the phone and began his talk with Bella. I sighed in relief. It all went well and we were driving up our home's driveway in no time. Just as I had predicted, Bella came running into Edward's arms. "You're home. At last," she cried, planting kisses on Edward's face. He chuckled and hugged her tightly, but not too hard. He was afraid he might injure the babies. "And you're on time." As usual, she rolled her eyes at me. "Hey, Alice." She hugged me round the neck. I hugged her back and patted her huge belly. "Ew. Gosh, Bella, is that some kind of disease of something?" I mocked horror at it. Bella gasped and slapped me lightly, though it didn't hurt at all. "Actually, no, Alice, but I appreciate your concern." She turned and walked off, but I held her back. "Sorry, Bella," I mumbled. "Forgive me." I puppy dog-eyed at her. I saw a flash of adoration in her eyes. Basically, observing her will crumble. "Of course, Alice, I was just joking anyway." She picked me up like I was a baby and carried me in the house where everyone else was. "Hey, you two," Emmett said as we came in. "We were just showing Esm what Eddie here did today." He looked down at Eddie. He'd faced back into the border collie and was lying on the floor. He was more relaxed in here than he was at the school. Maybe that was what happens when you're back with your mate again. You feel whole again. I smiled as Bella set me down and patted Eddie on the head. "Oh yeah, that reminded me. I was going to ask what you did." She sat down next to Esm and Rosalie. Surprisingly, she and Esm watched very intently at the little show. They laughed when Emmett pretended to catch the little cat Fran. I gasped as I was pulled into a vision when I was about to make Eddie do the trick shake. But this was no vision. All what I saw was just nothing, nothing at all. As if we'd never existed, as we'd never existed. "Alice, Alice, what's wrong, Alice?" "What is it?" Jasper grabbed me by the shoulders and shook me gently. I rattled silently in his grasp. "All our futures have gone blank," I whispered, terrified. EPOV. I was about to place my paw in Alice's hand when she suddenly froze. She swayed a little. Her eyes were blank, distant. I knew that look anywhere. Alice was having a vision. She gasped and her eyes were confused, but quickly changed to pure cold fear. Alice? I thought to her, doubting if she could hear me through all the haze of her visions. She was shaking slightly, not knowing it consciously. Alice, what's wrong? Esm panicked. My Bella looked afraid as she stared into Alice's eyes. Alice, what is it? Jasper hissed, seizing her into the protection of his arms. Alice trembled. Her voice sounded broken and full of dread. All our futures have gone blank, she whispered. Esm gasped. What happened? She grasped for an explainable explanation, and failed to. I don't know, it was all perfectly normal before, but now I just can't find our futures anywhere, like we don't exist anymore. Her voice cracked at the end. I'll call Carlisle. Emmett jumped up and walked out the room. Rosalie just glared at the door. Alice W. What's going on? Bella clutched at her stomach. I noticed she did that when she felt afraid for them. For our children, that wasn't even born yet. I don't know, Bella. The door opened and Carlisle came through. The wet glistening hair meant it was raining outside. I came as soon as I got Emmett's call. Why is London Bridge burning? Where are the aliens? He gasped, shaking the rain out of his blonde hair. We all stared at him in confusion. He cocked his head to the side, confused himself. Well? He pressed. Emmett came through the door and sat next to Rosalie. Shit, he mumbled so low I would have dreamt it. Carlisle. I knew you'd come faster this way. He slapped him on the back before sitting back down again. Emmett, why did you scream? Carlisle. Come quick. London Bridge is like burning. Oh crap, Carlisle, there's evil purple-haired aliens. They have Rose. Esm. Alice. Bella. Come now. Into the phone? Emmett stared at him blankly. Because I knew you would come quicker that way, he replied, a childish grin spreading over his face. I was correct. Rosalie slapped him. It was an innate reaction. Why? You idiot. She hit him on the head. Emmett rubbed it, grumbling. Carlisle Esm whispered. Her face relaxed a bit when Carlisle took her hand in his fingers. Esm dear, what is wrong? He asked his wife, looking around for an explanation that made his wife so miserable. Alice SSAT that our futures have gone. She choked out. Carlisle froze. The room was deadly quiet, as if someone had flicked the switch, mute on the world. Bella started trembling. I wrapped my arms around her and pulled her towards me. Once her face was covered by my shoulder, she began sobbing, ever so quietly. It broke my heart to see her pain, to see my angel being afraid, fearful. I felt like I couldn't protect her. I needed to protect my angel. She was all I have, the only thing I love. Carlisle was the first to break the silence. When did this happen, Alice? He was in leader mode now. Can you give me a clear picture of what you saw? Alice looked like she was concentrating on something. I was trying to see what the weather would be like tomorrow when I saw a flash of something, a reddish-brown blur, then I couldn't see anything. Alice explained, a reddish-brown cooler. It sounded woodsy, something that would suit her house back at home. But Alice could see anything. Except for the past, of course. This thing must have had a special kind of shield, like Bella. A special shield that could lock people's mind. If our futures have all disappeared, then that reddish-brown thing is near, blocking our minds too. There was only one thing that I recalled. There was only one animal I encountered, that not even Alice can see. These creatures were shapeshifters, but not like the pure breeds like Bella and I. These could only shift into one animal, the wolf. There was a wolf somewhere in Canada. I spotted one when I was hunting last season. It was a huge wolf. I felt a connection to it, whatever it was. I almost laughed my hyenas off when I found out they called themselves werewolves. Ha, well anyway, that wolf I saw was a young one. He shifted back to his normal form and we talked for a bit. His name was Seth Clearwater. Such a lovely lad. The boy was truly fascinated at me as I was to him. He looked only 16, give or take a few months. Our species were familiar. We were not the same, but close. Cousins, you could say. Seth wasn't a lone wolf, he was in a pack. A pack that could hear each other's mind in wolf form. I had quickly fled before they or Bella came looking for me. I didn't know if they were a threat to us, but they definitely loathe vampires, their sworn enemies. I never shared this with Bella. I never really wanted to make her stress over the fact that there are creatures that are threats to our immediate, friendly vampire family. I looked down at my Bella. She was staring at me with an accusing glare. You know what's going on, don't you? She thought to me. I put on an innocent expression. No, I'm just wondering how bad it could be. I lied. I put on a neutral face to prevent Emmett being suspicious. Bella heard the stumble in my fake words and scowled at me in suspicion. Edward, she warned. I swallowed. What's on your mind, love? My Bella asked. I just shook my head. Bella growled. I decided to listen to what the others were doing. Carlisle was guessing what the reddish-brown thing could be. Personally, I didn't know what the reddish-brown thing was, probably just a member of Seth Clearwater's pack. A bird? You said it was fast. Sort of like flying, maybe. He guessed. Alice shrugged. I don't know, I can't see anything. She was cut off by a sound, a thud of forepaws hitting the ground. No, but you can hear that, Jasper said quietly, standing in front of her protectively. We all stood to face the creatures outside. And what I knew what they didn't. They were about to approach their worst enemies. Jasper gave me a strange look. I just pretended not to notice as we all stepped out of the house to face 6 pairs of golden, rage-filled eyes. CPOV. I thought for a minute. A bird? I asked Alice. You said it was fast, sort of like flying. Maybe I prompted, but Alice only responded by a tiny whisper. I don't know. Her eyes were worried, staring at me. I can't see Annette. We all heard a pitter-patter of 4 pairs of legs approaching our house. Azim gripped onto me while we all took defensive positions to protect the ones we love. I glanced at Edward. He looked like he knew something, but no one questioned him. We all went outside. It was something big and quite shaggy. A bear? No, bears don't have that long tails, or ears. It reminded me of someone, but I didn't know who. There were 6 of them. One was pitch black, but had a few dark brown highlights thanks to my good sight. The shaggy animals looked like they could pass for a big dog, or a wolf. Yes. The wolf, the werewolves, I had heard about in my early days as a vampire. They were our worst enemies. I could tell that from the overwhelming urge to fight, to protect, to kill, and their smell. It was disgusting. Azim would have scolded me if she heard that. Though I know their scent had affected her just as much as it did to me. I could see she was trying hard not to scrunch up her face in disgust. Jasper growled at them, hiding Alice behind him. We all knew Alice can defend for herself. Jasper felt it was his right to protect her though. Just what he did in his Human Wars fight to protect. Who are you? What are you doing here? He and Emmett stalked towards them. I put up my hand to stop them. Stop. Wait, the voice wasn't mine. Edward told them to stop. He was staring at one wolf in particular. It was smaller and had a brown coat. I put my hand down, not knowing what to do next. Seth? He whispered. The wolf's eyes widened and he barked. Edward started to form a smile. He suddenly looked back to Bella. We were all staring at the two. I realized they were having a private conversation in their mind after a few seconds. Enemies? Bella whispered, horrified. She glanced at us uneasily, probably not realizing she spoke aloud. She looked back at Edward and she relaxed again. The wolves were staring at Jasper and Emmett. The one I think is named Seth was staring at Edward and Bella in fascination. I decided to step in. Hello, I'm guessing you are the werewolves? It was difficult to speak to them with a spark of violence in the air. One of the wolves huffed and pointed his big nose at Edward. Bella cocked her head to the side. I guess I have to translate. Bella love? Edward asked her. Bella nodded, cautiously. Edward phased. He looked like the wolves, but his coat was a dark bronze and his eyes were a darker green. Rosalie looked shocked for a moment before she quickly returned to her sour expression. Bella sighed. He wants me to translate for him, for the wolves. She stepped back and closed her eyes. Ask anything. Her voice was solemn. Why are you here? I asked the black wolf. Immediately Edward snarled at him, as in daring him to answer it. Bella's eyes snapped open when she heard Edward. She glared at the black wolf. What's going on? She demanded, grabbing Edward's tail. Edward shook his head and grunted at the black wolf. Bella sighed and mumbled. No worries, continue. She spoke to Edward before closing her eyes the second time. The black wolf looked at me. Bella stiffened but still translated. We've traced your scent from the woods and have realized it was the cold ones, the vampires, our enemies. We have come to dispose of you, dirty murderous demons. Bella flinched. Esm held on me for dear life. I heard furious growls from Emmett and Jasper. Ew. Jasper sneered, crouching for spring. Stop, I ordered. The authority in my voice was not to be ignored. Jasper, Emmett, calm down now, I asked them quietly before turning to the smug-looking wolf. Why? There doesn't have to be a war. We could have our own lands. A treaty. We don't even hunt humans, I begged. There was a rumble of anxiety and excitement throughout the pack. We can have our own lands? Bella translated. I nodded eagerly. Yes, our own lands. You protect humans if I remember correctly, so you can have your own land for your own people to protect. I summarized. That doesn't sound like a bad idea, Leech, Bella said. Esm hissed, don't call my husband the Leech. She glared at him. Rosalie muttered, it's okay Mom, it's just a pack of mutts anyway. She didn't realize what a mistake she made from saying that. The big black wolf stepped towards her, growling as was the whole of the others. Rosalie hissed at him. Emmett stood in front of her. Edward stepped into the wolf's path, growling at him with a warning glare. He backed down, but Bella still translated, do not insult my pack. Her solemn voice changed to anger. I put my hands up in surrender. I think it is the best that you should leave. We will arrange a meeting sometime tomorrow. I closed this discussion. The pack nodded and ran away. I sighed in relief. They were gone. Edward still looked tense. He was probably listening to their thoughts through the wolf form. Edward? Honey, come on, let's go. She was back to her normal self. She pulled on Edward's tail. Edward stiffened and shook his tail out to free from her hand, just in time for Bella to get out the way as a reddish-brown wolf jumped on Edward's back. He yelped and shook him off his back. The red-brown wolf landed on his paws before charging at him again. They collided with a boom. Emmett grabbed Bella and pulled her away just in time when the red-brown wolf fell in her space. Bella had tear-filled eyes and she was gasping. Her eyes were huge in panic and she trembled as the horrific fight between Edward and one pack member were on. They were tearing each other's fur, biting, throwing, and grabbing at each other. I couldn't even stop it because they wouldn't listen. Bella snarled when the wolf bit Edward's leg. Edward yelped and jumped back in surprise. As he was inspecting the damage, the wolf charged at him again, but he hit something. It looked like he hit an invisible brick wall and fell to the ground in a daze. Bella murmured some stuff. Edward glanced at her for a brief second. He shook his fur like a normal dog does when we finished a bath and walked in a circle and looked at Bella again. She nodded and breathed out in relief. He's protected were her only words. SM cried out in relief. Oh God. She praised and hugged Bella around the waist. Bella, Alice said from the far end of our line. The others, a very tall and bulky Indian man, stepped through the trees, among other wolves. He wasn't wearing a shirt. The red-brown wolf snarled at the smug Edward and charged at him again, but being flung back in the process. Jacob. The Indian man called. He must have been the alpha. The strong tone in his voice was powerful to the pack. The wolf growled at Edward before slinking back towards his master, his hair standing up on his back. Edward watched smugly as the wolf surrendered under the alpha glare. The Indian man spoke again. Think yourself lucky, leeches. He couldn't seem to help the bitterness in his voice when he spoke to us leeches. Jacob seemed to show a bit of violence at that shapeshifter. He pointed to Edward. The Jacob wolf growled in agreement. I suppose there is a need of a treaty, now that you cannot control your instincts. I spoke calmly to the Indian man. He nodded carefully, thinking through my words. I think it's best if you two leave. I don't want them starting a fight again, I whispered to Bella next to Esm's side. Bella nodded and both Bella and Edward retreated back to the trees, probably back to their home, and then I opened my mouth once more to claim our land and create the first treaty. EPOV. I faced back to my normal form and picked Bella up bridal style and ran back to the house. It looked so peaceful, sitting there among many trees. The meadow was behind it, acting as our garden. The little pathway I made led to a little stream with Bella's flower collection. It really was heaven on earth. I climbed the porch steps and went straight through the door, placing Bella on the couch. Carefully. She glared at my slowness. I'm not some kind of porcelain doll that can break with a slight pinch of your fingers, Edward. She pouted, placing her hands on her belly. She rubbed softly. I sat next to her and set her on my lap. No, of course not, my love. You are much more valuable than that. I planted a kiss on her forehead. She smelled delightful. You're my Bella, I whispered lowly in her ear. She shivered when I grazed her ear with my teeth. I love you, she sighed, cuddling me on the chair. I kissed her hair. As I love you, I murmured. Edward? Bella asked me, sitting up. You said the wolves are our cousins. Why did that one try to fight you? She frowned, her hands gripping my shirt collar. I sighed. Hey, Jacob thought that we sided with the vampires. You know, I told you about the sworn enemy thing, didn't I? She nodded, her face smoothed out with understanding. Oh, we don't have to worry about them that much now anyway. She snuggled back into my arms, her head resting under my neck. I sighed in relief. BPOV. I felt him kiss my hair. I wanted to stay like this forever. Apparently my stomach had other ideas. I groaned when I heard my stomach rumble, quite loudly. Edward laughed while I blushed. He stopped laughing immediately when his belly rumbled. Now it was his turn to blush while I laughed. I guess we are both hungry, huh? I patted him and jumped up, but he pushed me down. Bella love, you have to rest. Wait here, I'll go make dinner. He kissed me gently on the lips and headed to the kitchen. I licked my lips. Oh wait. Can I have the raw meat again, please? I called to him, shuffling up to my feet. All right then. He called back. I suddenly felt a really strong urge to pee. That what happens when there's a baby sitting on your bladder. 2 babies for that matter. Crap, I moaned. Edward suddenly was in front of me, cupping my face in his hands. Bella, are you okay? He looked worried. I shook my head frantically. Need to pee. I gasped, wriggling like a worm. Edward snatched me up and led me to the big bathroom. He waited outside the door while I done my business. I came out, with a fully washed face and a big tummy, as usual. Edward caressed my cheek. Are you alright now, love? His fingers traced the outline of my lips. Perfect, I murmured between his fingers. He chuckled. Well, I got to get dinner serving. He picked me up and took me back to the living room where the fire was flickering and put me on the couch. I breathed in and was overcome by the pleasuring aroma of the raw meat that wafted from the kitchen archway. I inhaled the delicious scent, my mouth watered in desire. I wondered idly if I could phase. It would probably annoy the babies. I guess the whole shifting body shape would be very disturbing. They could phase if they were a few months old. They had the potential to because their parents were both pure shapeshifters when they were convened. Edward and I's parents were not purebred at the time, so we only changed when we were older. But my 2 little angels wouldn't grow old, or to the age of 16 or 15. They were changed immediately, thus not being able to age. The research we did helped a lot. Only the newborn purebreds would grow to the age of 10 or older, we think. After that they will no longer age, but during their aging days they could still phase. From the little research I found their aging rate is rather slow, sort of like a human aging, but just a few months slower. I retraced my thoughts back to the consideration that I could phase. This womb therein is getting a bit small now. Animals have much bigger wombs. It would be more comfortable for my 2 angels to move about, no more waking Mummy up in the night because of their adorable kicks. There was only one animal that I always will love to be. I phased. It did feel like I had more space, really. I rested my head on my paws and sniffed the air, welcoming the delicious scent of raw meat. EPOV. I walked out with our dinner. Well, Bella's dinner. I'd always liked the cooked meat rather than the raw one. It had more flavor. I glanced at the couch and nearly dropped everything. A beautiful, spotted cat lay on its back. It was sniffing like mad. Maybe the poor thing had a cold. As it heard me move, it looked up at me and I stared into her beautiful brown eyes. Bella, I whispered in awe. She purred and her eyes fixed on the plate of raw meat and a glass of milk. How ironic that was in my hand. She licked her lips with her pink tongue. I placed it near her and sat down with her. I brushed my hands through her short fur. She had the most interesting color spots all over her body. Her tail was stunning as well, Beautiful creature, I thought to her. Her eyes flickered toward me, but she still continued to chew on the chewy meat I had given her. It's called a cheetah, hun, she thought back to me. I needed more space for the babies. I nodded. Whatever makes you feel better, love. I grinned when she rolled her eyes. Well, I'm getting hungry now. I kissed her head before I took my plate to the table and ate my share of dinner. I was completely bloated. I stood up and put my plate in the dishwasher and done the same with Bella's. She was half asleep, sitting opposite the fireplace, still in her animal form. I faced to a cheetah as well and lay next to her. She turned her head to look at me and she smiled tiredly. Hey, she thought. Her mind voice sounded so tired I laughed quietly. She looked confused. What? I shook my head. I stared at the fire. It looked so colorful. Some people would have seen just orange and red stuff fire. But this fire had more color. It was beautiful. I was pulled out of my thoughts by Bella licking my face. I growled quietly. Bella chuckled in my mind. She kept on licking me. I'm cleaning you. Natural instinct. She told me, no need to get excited, my love, she winked. She started licking my neck. It felt so good. Though I had to remind myself it was for hygienic purposes only. I woke up around 8. The day was Tuesday, the second day of school for everyone except for Carlisle, SM, me and Bella, who was obviously too old to attend high school. I was still in my animal form. My Bella was lying on my side. The fire had worn out, though I was still warm. However, I faced and got up carefully, careful not to move my angel. I collected random cushions and put them under her to make her more comfortable on the floor. I felt like hunting today. I'll have to wait for Bella to wake up before I went. It would have to be a short distance. Bella couldn't sprint as fast as before. There would still be plenty of elk around, I thought to myself as I faced back to my normal self and headed for the bathroom. After a shower I went to my study. It was the most peaceful places in the house, apart from Bella's painting studio and the music room. It was relaxing. The music room had loads of instruments and musical books in every corner. It wasn't messy, of course, it was arranged to be perfect. Bella mastered most of the woodwind. I also mastered the strings and the woodwind. Brass was not neither Bella and I's favorite instrument. I was lost in my happy memories for a while. The soft ticking of my clock was comforting, like a simple lullaby. Ring. 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 I groaned and answered it, desperate for it to leave me alone. Hello? Please go away, I thought silently. Edward? Carlisle's voice echoed from the speaker. Carlisle? I quickly thought through what to say. What did you do last night? Did you make the treaty? Carlisle, you're not answering my questions. Tell me. I waited anxiously, biting my lip. Well, if you give me some time to think, then I will tell. Edward, he chuckled. I frowned. My apologies, Carlisle. I really need to know this. Yes, I understand. Now, Carlisle explained everything about the treaty. The wolves now had their land. La Push, the different part of Forks, outside the line. The vampires had their land too. Mostly the whole of Forks, which they swore they could never harm a human, but if they slip it then they would have to move. Bella and I, however, could go anywhere we want. We were related to the wolves anyway. I was relieved when I pressed end call on the phone. Some of it was because I was certain that there were no more wolves approaching our homes at random times, but mostly because I wanted to go back to relaxing in a more peaceful place. BPOV. 3 months later, it was a normal evening. I was lounging on the couch, my baby bulge as big as ever. Emmett wanted to come over to play wee quietly. Edward was making me tea. I was about to ask Emmett something when I suddenly felt a strong need to pee. I groaned and stood up, but when I did, a sharp cramp pierced through me. I cried out and grabbed my stomach, waiting for it to end. When it faded, I saw Edward's worried face right up to mine. He was worried as usual. It was no big deal anyway. Bella love, are you alright? He asked, eyeing my pale face. I faked a smile and wobbled upstairs. I only got to the banister until Edward appeared in front of me again. His arm extended out towards me. At least let me help you to the bathroom. He held both his arms out. I placed my hand on the banister. No, it's already. I felt something warm and wet trickle down my thigh. My automatic response to this was to be annoyed and embarrassed that I wet myself, but this wasn't an accident. My waters broke, I whispered, desperately searching Edward's face for some signs of life. His face was frozen. I hissed at Emmett, staring at the damp place on the floor. Damn it, Emmett, don't just sit there. Call him. I grabbed Edward's arm in panic. He thawed, his eyes wildly looking for a phone. He pulled me outside to my Mercedes. Where are we going? I asked faintly. I whimpered when I was hit with another painful cramp. To Carlisle, he answered soothingly. I nodded, pressing my lips together to hold in my cries, knowing they would torment Edward and my little angels. By the time we arrived at the Cullens driveway, with Emmett following behind, it became too hard to hold in my cries. All the Cullens flew out the door. SM was the first to come. She looked excited and pitiful at the same time. Let's get her inside. It's going to be okay, Bella. She comforted me while Carlisle put some Dr. Plastic gloves on. Edward bent over me, stroking my face. Bella love, it's alright, your water just broke. You're going into labor now, he said calmly, though I could hear his tension seep through. 6 hours later, and that was how long my mum was in labor for. I was assaulted by another painful cramp near my vagina. I screamed, "Get them out now." I gasped, sweat beading from my forehead. Carlisle placed me on a soft bed. I had to strip off my pants. I had no thought to be embarrassed. The babies were all that mattered now. Edward held my hand as I crushed it against my death grip. The prickling sensation threatened to overwhelm me. SM kept glancing at where the babies were coming. Her face was a surprise when the blinding pain increased. What? I moaned at her expression. She just shook her head and smiled warmly at me. Okay, Bella, when you feel the next cramp after the other one, I want you to push. Alright. Carlisle looked me straight in the eye. I nodded and kept on screaming. I was overwhelmed by the next cramp. This one I felt the strong need to push, sort of like when you're constipated, but near the vagina area, but a lot more painful. Breathe, Bella, Edward urged me. I glared at him. Shut up, I moaned. Can I please push now? I begged Carlisle, tears pouring from my swollen eyes. He shook his head. The next one, I promise, he smiled. Everyone was freaking smiling. I was so annoyed. I was going through all this pain and everyone is grinning like stupid clowns. I screamed and gasped when the cramp I was waiting for took me again. I didn't wait. I pushed. Push, Bella. Carlisle cheered. I am. I snarled. Alice, Jasper, Emmett and Rosalie all filled the room. They were downright shocked at me. Alice took my other hand and squeezed it gently. Push, Bella. Alice cheered for me in her soprano voice. I screamed again and again. Come on, love. Edward was the loudest voice from everyone else. Never touch me again. I screamed at him. I cried and pushed to my limit, swearing dirty words at anything. SM and Rosalie had the most selected expressions. I was surprised Rosalie was cheering me on like the others. I felt the sweat glands trickle down my cheek. I squeezed the two hands I was grasping, trying to eliminate the pain and send it to them. Nearly there, Bella, Carlisle reassured me. I gritted my teeth and pushed and pushed. My pain ended when I heard the delicate wails of a baby. I was too exhausted to sit up. My breaths were deeper and louder. Everyone gasped when they took their look of my baby. Congratulations, Bella. Edward Carlisle's voice had a hint of love in it. It's a beautiful baby boy. All the girls awed at the bundle that cried in Carlisle's arms. I could see that SM longed to hold him, but this was my baby now. Sorry, SM. Let me hold him, I croaked, sitting up on the fluffy pillows. Carlisle handed the bundle to Edward, who masterfully cradled him before surrendering him to me. He was adorable, his tiny hands balled into fists again and again. His cries were silent now, disappearing when his perfect daddy held him. His face was like mine, but he had Edward's mouth and dark green eyes, and his hair was more approaching Edward's color, but his hair was curly like mine. He had the perfect share between me and Edward. He was ours, my little Andrew. I was so lost in my moment of my perfect baby I nearly forgot about the other one. I wasn't just having one baby, I was having twins, my baby girl. Edward? I whispered. He was staring at Andrew, what all I could comprehend was fatherly love. He looked down at me with a half smile. Yes, love? He whispered back, leaning down. Release me, I whispered quietly. Realization dawned in his face like the first sunny mornings. He jumped back and whispered something in Carlisle's ear. Carlisle looked at me, then my still big baby bulged. Bella, Carlisle said anxiously, would you terribly hate me if you would have to deliver another baby? He asked sheepishly. I nodded. 15 minutes later. Come on, Bella. One last push. Carlisle cheered me. I screamed. Having twins was the worst pregnancy ever. I remembered the shows I watched when young teens had babies. Remember, kids, don't get pregnant young. This is what it feels like. I can't. I cried. All my energy was gone. I couldn't do it. Golil sis. Emmett cheered from across the room with Jasper. Andrew was watching wide-eyed from Rosalie's arms. His tiny arms reached out to me, but Rosalie kept him distracted. Edward was cheering me on. Everybody was. I screamed in frustration. I have to stop this screaming, I thought randomly to myself. No. I'm experiencing the worst pain in vaginal history here. My hormonal side defended me. I considered giving up, but I knew I couldn't. My baby needed me, my little Renasme. I felt warm inside when I thought of my tiny babies. They needed me. And Renasme needed to get out. I was shaking when I pushed my hardest, screaming to the top of my lungs, tasting the unpleasant sweat glands rolling into my mouth. I felt wet, empty. I opened my eyes. Edward was right up in my face, again. I managed to smile slightly until I collapsed. Bella? Edward called out to me. I shook my head weakly. Gimme a minute, I sighed. Edward squeezed my hand. Give her to me, Carlisle, Edward insisted. My attention refocused. My eyes snapped open. My little baby, Renasme. Edward was cradling a tiny bundle wrapped up in soft yellow blankets. I could see the little strands of bronze curls bounce from out the blankets when he rocked her. He placed the yellow bundle into my stretched arms. He stood and walked over where Andrew was and picked him up, sitting back next to my bed. I smiled at him and looked down at my little Renasme. She was breathtakingly beautiful. Her big greenish-brownish eyes were wide and her tiny, cute nose was scrunched up as she sniffed and patted my chest. She had Edward's face, my eyes and Edward's color hair. So adorable. So adorable, I thought in admiration. Renasme immediately looked in my eyes. She turned her lips up into a gummy smile. I hugged her tight to my chest, placing a gentle kiss on her soft forehead. Emmett had cut the umbilical cord. He had joked about it and laughed, but I could see that it wasn't all jokes in his eyes. Rosalie and Alice all had their turns holding my babies. The boys bent over them, cooing and making funny faces, but when you place a baby in their arms, they freeze and looked completely petrified. I laughed and showed them how to do it. Carlisle had them placed in a special crib where he made sure that they were healthy and strong. Days as a newborn was the most vulnerable days any baby could have, and because Edward and I are really protective parents, we agreed to anything that Carlisle suggested to that would help our children. The rate the twins were growing, I could begin breastfeeding in about a few days. In their little high cribs they were played with, cuddled, entertained every second of every day. They were never left alone. Every night it would be one Cullen or one Mason watching them sleep. The Cullens' nighttime activities were quieter. I was deeply concerned about the twins. Translation: no more sex when my children are sleeping. Finally, my children are allowed out of the tiny hospital beds. Edward and I never left the house, not even to go hunting. I cooked in the Cullens' kitchen, but they didn't have any raw elk meat. Jasper offered he could bring in dead animals for us, but I didn't let him. I knew Esm wouldn't approve, and so now it was those nights when I was breastfeeding the twins. Little Andrew was a greedy thing. I had to fill a bottle of breast milk for him just so I could get little Renasme fed. I was feeding Renasme one night when I felt Edward creep up on me. His breath tickled my ear when he whispered, "Do you want to take them home now?" His nose skimmed down my neck. Renasme's dreary eyes watched Edward with fascination. Edward touched her nose softly. Her tired eyes finally closed into an exhausted sleep. I sighed in relief. Not now. In the morning when they're not grouchy, I whispered, full aware of the stubborn child in my arms. This naughty thing never wanted to go to sleep. I frowned. Not till you came. I think she's a daddy's girl. Edward chuckled. I always wanted a girl, but I was blessed with both genders. His hands rested on my shoulders, massaging it. Can I take her? He suddenly asked. I nodded and handed her to him. He took off upstairs. I followed him, stopping outside the guest bathroom. I'm going to take a shower, I whispered, poking my head around the guest room to see Edward tucking Andrew in. He nodded. I lightly skipped into the bathroom. I looked at myself in the mirror. I had my long hair pinned up in a bun and my eyes were tired and red with exhaustion. With all the human pregnancy books I read, I was coping more than the others. I quickly changed plan. I turned the bath water on. I put in half of bubble bath from the bottle and slipped inside. The hot water rushing at my legs and thighs was beautiful. I let myself relax into welcoming bubbles, letting my hair get wet as well. It was bliss for a few minutes. The sudden knock at the door made me jump. Bella love, I thought you were taking a shower? Edward called from behind the door. I groaned, sinking down to the soapy water. I heard him chuckle. The lie, he pretended to whine through the keyhole. You've been there for hours. He continued to whine. I gasped. I was here for that long? I must have fallen asleep then. I quickly climbed out the bath, looking around for my towel. No towel. Where's my towel? I hissed, desperately looking for something that would cover me. Even my clothes were gone. Yes, love? Edward called from the door. His voice was innocent, too innocent. I stormed up to the door. Give me my clothes, Edward, I whispered, annoyed, and a bit pissed. No, if you want it I could mentally visualize him smirking. You'll have to come out for it, he said. I blushed. Edward, you know I can't do that. The twins, he cut me off. They're in the other room, he whined. I gritted my teeth and yanked the door open. Edward stared at me, shocked. I spun around, waving my hands about. Happy? So can I have my CL? I was cut off with a gasp as Edward slammed me against the wall. Bella, he moaned, crushing my lips with his. His fingers dug into my leg as it wound around his waist. My body was on fire. I wound my arms around his back and pulled him closer to me. I felt his arms tighten. He pulled back, our ragged breathing, and his darkened eyes were so sexy. I smirked and pulled his lips back to mine. I felt him begging for entrance, his tongue licking the outline of my lip. I allowed him through and our wet tongues fought for dominance. He was so sweet, the taste of him was like warm honey. My hands undid the buttons on his shirt and he shrugged it off. His chest was so strongly built, I couldn't help but explore it greedily with my devious hands. I traced the outline of his muscles and my hands pressed into his stomach, traveling south. Edward grabbed my hands with a gasp. I only had slight contact with it anyway. Bella, he held my hands over my head, my stolen clothes resting on the floor. He kissed his way down to my neck too. He bit my neck, not softly, before licking it. I bit my lip, trying not to make much noise. We're in a vampire home after all. Edward suddenly stopped. He jerked his head up and smiled at me. If I'm correct, your clothes are near the bathroom door? He whispered in my ear. I sighed. He let me go. I quickly ran to get my clothes, muttering that next time I would get double sets of clothes when I fall asleep in the bath. Edward had retreated into the bathroom, probably having a shower. I got changed and collapsed on the double bed. I scrambled underneath the covers and waited for Edward. It was a while until I felt warm arms wrap around my waist. He pulled me closer to his chest, making me feel his steady heartbeat. I sighed. Good night, my Bella, Edward whispered. I grabbed his hand and kissed it, caressing it with my cheek. Night EDW yawn ard I yawned. He chuckled. Good night, my Bella, he whispered as I fell into those peaceful slumbers called sleep. 3 years later. It has been exactly 3 years since me and Andrew have been born, and we had the most pleasurable days out of it. Andrew and his sister love each other like any brother and sister would. They would fight a lot, but they always get along. Andrew had curly hair from me, the color was bronze, like his father. Renesmee had slightly darker hair, not quite bronze but slowly approaching my hair color. They both had my brown eyes, but there were green specks around the sides. I'd never seen a color like it. They had the most unique personality. Renesmee was the sweet angel and Andrew was the troublemaker in the family. Thank Emmett, they both were special. Literally, they had gifts. Andrew and Renesmee had the ability to control the elements, the water, air, earth. There are also powers are like their fathers. They could move whatever they wanted with just their minds. no matter how big or heavy it was. Me and Andrew could both turn invisible. Invisible. Don't ask, it was just after lunch, the kids were in their little playroom painting pictures. I was making dinner, wraps with thin elk strips, salad and elk sauce. I had just finished the first of the wraps to be put in the oven when I heard a squeal followed by a giggle. Mimi. Help me. Me screamed, running into the kitchen with Andrew chasing after her. Me ran circles around me as Andrew tried to tickle her. Hey! Stop, I'm cooking here, it's dangerous. I told them, putting the kitchen knife in the highest drawers. Can't mummy. He tickle me. Me screamed, still running circles around. Stop it now, Andrew. I pulled him away from me and let him out of the kitchen. Go play in the garden for now. I opened the back door, watching them sprint out of the house like they had too much sweets. I sighed, going back to the kitchen. I put the pots and pans in the dishwasher and started on my daily dose of peace. I sat outside with my tea, watching the kids play around. I heard the front door open. I turned. Edward walked through. He put his coat on the hanger and stuck his head in the living room door. Love? He called. We're in the garden. I called back, putting my tea down. Edward came into the garden. I got up and kissed him. How was work? I asked him, fixing his tie, the same as any other day, delivering babies, saving lives, giving medicines. You know, Andrew and me both looked up. Daddy. They yelled, hugging his trousers with a vice hold. Edward laughed. It's good to be home. At the Cullens house, Alice was having a vision. Her eyes glazed over and she felt as if the vision was pulling her away from the couch she was sitting on and into the future. APOV. It was the baseball field. It was snowing. All of us stood in a line. Nessie and Andrew were there too. Playing? Talking? Alice. No, waiting. We were waiting for something so beyond. Future Edward looked at me. When Alice. My vision blurred to another. It was Aro Volturi. Future Aro smiled at the guard. We will strike today, and time to meet your old friends. Aro looked at someone quite tall. I couldn't see most of his face. Alice. The vision blurred again back to the field. We were still waiting in the line. Like we were anticipating for a fight. Alice. Volturi. In the vision, Emmett and Edward growled at the gray mist with their mates behind them. Alice. I was jolted out of my vision by Jasper. He was shaking me, getting overly worried. Again, my eyes focused and the first thing I saw was Jasper's face with worry etched into his expression. I smiled when he stopped shaking me. I'm fine, Jazz, everything's fine. I lied smoothly, taking his hand tightly in mine. Really? Your mood didn't seem to feel like it was fine. He stared into my eyes. I smiled softly, but I didn't look into his. It was then I realized that it was only me and Jazz in the house. Jasper's smirk noticed my second of confusion, but I knew it anyway. They've gone hunting, I know, Jazz. It was my turn to smirk at him. I tapped my temple and winked. Jazz made a face and I laughed. Oh, you're so cute when you're annoyed. He seemed to bite and laughed along with me. Phew, that was close. I needed to speak to Edward. Now, EPOV. We were all watching a movie in the living room. Shark Tale. Andrew wanted us all to watch it. He's going through an obsession with sharks. He suddenly thought that sharks were now the coolest mammal ever. He was sat snugly in my wife's arms looking very intently at the TV screen. I had Nessie sleeping soundly in my arms. Her favorite bunny rabbit was safe in her tight vice hold. I held her tight in my embrace, looking at the movie but not really watching it. Kid movies these days have been getting more and more unrealistic as they go on. I feel like I have watched every movie there is, and now the movie producers have been doing the same thing but better or in more detail, or just because it's the 21st century. I sighed and looked at my beautiful wife sleeping on the couch. Her head was rested on the back and her slender arms wrapped around her son. I could stare at her for days. She was everything. My life, and so was my beautiful children. I rested my head back on the cushion and prepared myself for sleep. Ring. 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 My phone vibrated from the inside of my jean pocket. I groaned mentally and took out my phone. I looked at the tiny screen. Alice? I whispered, wondering why she would call this late. Edward. Alice hissed into the phone. We have a problem. What? The wolves? Again. What do they want with me anyway? I think. No. Not the wolves. Worse. Much worse. Come to the house, I'll explain it to you all there. Alice May family is pretty much zoned out now. I'll just come, okay? Okay, we need you there now. Okay, see you in a second. Bye. I hung up and looked down. Nessie was looking at the phone. She yawned and looked at me. Daddy, are we going to see Aunt Alice? I looked down at her and smiled sadly. No sweetie, it'll be just me. Alice needs help on something at the house. Can I help? Please Daddy, she pouted adorably. She started to get off the couch she was once sleeping on. I sighed and got off as well. Fine, Rene's me. Go get dressed into something warm. We're taking the car. I told her as I went upstairs to change out of my PJs. I heard a squeal and little feet pounding up the stairs to her and Andy's room. The door shut. I sighed. Rene's me would probably be taking apart her wardrobe by now. Bella and Esm had been out recently to buy more clothes for the twins. I was secretly glad that Alice couldn't go because she had school. She was constantly begging Carlisle for her to bunk off school so she could go shopping with them. He said no. Naturally, after I got changed I went to Nessie's bedroom to wait outside the door. I heard a thumping noise behind the door so I knocked, startled. Honey? Are you okay? Do you need help with something? I waited but there was no response. Just as I was opening the door I heard her scream and she slammed the door shut before it was opened all the way. Daddy, I'm changing my clothes. She cried from the room. I chuckled quietly and waited again, leaning on the wall. A few minutes later my little girl came out the room with a stripy pink long sleeve with a brown dress on top. She put on white tights as well. I'd done it all myself, she grinned, twirling the dress in pride. I smiled and picked her up. Walking down the carpeted stairs I put her down and told her to get her shoes on. Okay. She giggled and ran to the direction of her little black shoes. I looked over to where Bella and Andrew were sleeping still. I didn't want her to worry when she woke up so I placed a little note on the chair, explaining the call and that Nessie had come with me. Ready? I asked Nessie. She smiled and went to open the door. I shook my head. No, we're not walking, we're taking the car. I told her as I went into the direction of the garage. I opened the car door and Nessie scrambled into the car seat, putting the seatbelt on with ease. I put the keys in and the car purred quietly. I always loved this car. It was a black M-Class Mercedes-Benz. I pulled out of the driveway and followed the path to the Cullens house. No doubt that we'd be late now. ESPOV. Why isn't he here yet? He was supposed to be here now. My daughter growled in annoyance. I stared out the window quietly. Alice had been on edge since that vision. She called us straight away, telling us to come home. She didn't tell anyone what was happening. She wanted Edward here to hear it as well. But he was late. 10 minutes late. Maybe there was something he needed to do, I said quietly. He normally phased to come here because it was quicker. But maybe he wasn't traveling alone. Give him some time, Alice. He can't be here in a blink of an eye like you can. My mate defended Edward. Alice groaned in frustration. But he is 10 minutes, no 11 minutes late. I can't see his future cause it's blurry and that normally happens when one of the twins are near him. Somehow the twins can block Alice from seeing their future. Because they were children of purebreds, they were much stronger than their parents' resistance. Alice was about to rant again but a car pulling into the driveway stopped her from talking. She opened the door before Carlisle could and let Edward in. About time. Where the hell were you? I thought you ditched us. Why are you so, Nessie? What are you doing here? What is she doing here? Alice hissed at Edward quietly so Rene's me couldn't hear. Hello to you too. I'm fine by the way, he muttered. Nessie let go of Edward's hand and ran over to hug Jasper who was standing not far from Alice. Uncle Jazzy. She mumbled into his trouser legs. Hey. Emmett laughed. Where's my hug, Squirt? He picked up Nessie and twirled her around gently. I smiled at the two and went over to greet my son. Good evening, Edward. I hugged him fiercely. How's everyone? I never seem to see you as often as like you know. He smiled knowingly. Yeah, they're great. The kids seem to be full of sugar every day. He shook his head at Rene's me. He turned back to Alice and glared at her slightly. I was going to be on time, but Sleeping Princess here wanted to come as well. He jerked his chin to release me. She got changed, and by that time it was like, what, 20 past. I took the car because I knew Renesmee would be too tired. I'm not tired, Daddy. Nessie cried. Yes, you were yawning all the way here. No, now what? I was pretending. Pretending? Yes. That what I said, pretending. Really? Really? We listened to the father and daughter banter for a while before one gave up and we all laughed. It was nice to forget about the reason why we were all here so late. EPOV. We were all sitting down on the chairs. Esm took Nessie upstairs while Alice explained the situation. The Volturi are coming again. I whispered as Alice told us everything. Who was that person, Alice? Rosalie asked quietly. Alice shook her head. I don't know, was till apparently Aro said he would meet his old friends again. The air suddenly felt hard to breathe. Did you see what he looked like? Was he a vampire? Jasper looked at me like he was contemplating something. What do you mean, Edward? He asked me. I blinked and looked down. I remembered when I was still being held captive by the Volturi, like everyone who was a shapeshifter was. I remembered Amber telling us all that Aro was taking some of us to be part of his guard. It gave him power. There was a man that was taken by Aro and Chaos. He was tall and had long brown hair that was in a ponytail. Roland. He was strong and dangerous, and that made Aro very happy. They took him screaming and thrashing, and we couldn't do anything. We just stood there in the darkness as they tortured him. We couldn't fight or yell in protest or they'll just kill us. Roland was taken. Jamal said they brainwashed him to being loyal to the guard, and I believed her. It wasn't long before a new addition was thrown into a prison. Her name was Bella. Edward? I looked up, quickly getting out of the haze of the flashback. Alice was staring at me, like everyone was. Are you okay? I breathed in raggedly and nodded. Closing my eyes, I whispered, what's his name? Roland or something. Edward, what is it? My heart froze in fear. They found us. Roland must have tracked us. No, they found us. God damn it, I yelled, standing up. Carlisle pushed me back down, holding onto my shoulders. Who is Roland, Edward? He asked desperately. Shapeshifter. I told him hoarsely he's going to kill my family. CPOV. He told us everything about what they did to him, about what they did to their species. I never thought it would be this sickening. He told us about his experience from his first time of facing. What about Bella's? I asked him softly. He shrugged. She never told me hers. We all wanted to forget about it since we came here. My son looked outside the window. I never knew they would find us here, though. He whispered brokenly. When will they be here, Alice? I asked her. 3 days. I'm sorry I didn't see it before, Edward. She cried as Jasper held her. It's okay, Alice. No one knows everything. He sighed. I should probably get going now. Just as he said that, Esm came downstairs holding a sleeping Nessie over her shoulder. She handed her to him and smiled sadly. Her eyes were glistening with unused tears. Drive safely. Good night, Mum. We watched as Edward placed Nessie into the back car seat and drove off back up the path. I awoke by a crunching of paper. Andy was still leaning on my arm, so I reached with my other one. I smoothed it out and read. Bella, Alice called. She said there was a problem at the house. Renesmee is coming with me. Be back as soon as I can. Love, Edward. I sighed and put the note back on the chair. I looked at the window and realized it was still dark. I touched Andy's nose and whispered, time to get off, Mummy baby. You need to go to your bed. I picked him up and carried him to his room. He stirred and yawned. Not yet, Tomato, go sleepy. He mumbled as he fell asleep as soon as his head touched the pillow. I kissed his head and walked out, shutting the door quietly. I went downstairs and cleaned the mess from last night. There was popcorn and crisps on the chair and the floor. Soon, it was all tidy and clean. I put the fire back on and sat down on the floor with my mug of tea. I stared at the TV, watching a cooking program. There was some lady telling you how to make a light elk and fish lunch. My mouth watered a bit. I jumped up when I heard a car pull up and go into the garage. I went to the garage and saw my love taking our daughter out of the car seat. I went up to him and grinned. Welcome back. Suddenly, he spun around and took me into his arms. He buried his face in my hair and breathed in deeply. Bella, he sighed in relief. I stroked his back and rested my cheek on his chest. I felt a strong heartbeat erratically. Edward, love, what's wrong? I asked, pulling my head back to look at his eyes. They were wet and glistening. He inhaled shakily and kissed my hair, shutting his eyes tightly. I frowned and pulled out of his embrace. I saw a flash of panic cross his face before he looked at me and exhaled. Bella, yes, they're coming back, the Volturi, and they've got a helper. Roland, he's a shapeshifter. Edward, I whispered brokenly. I wound my arms around him again as I listened to what he had to say. I think they brainwashed him and him into a monster. They're coming right now. Alice said they'll be here in 3 days. He choked on the last words. It felt my whole world had shattered. My only last reason of sanity was my mate and my children. I held on to him. My body was shaking and my cries were loud. Why couldn't they leave us alone? Before it seemed as if my life was perfect and now everything came tumbling down on me, choking. I couldn't breathe. Bella. Edward cried as I sagged in his arms. He held me up and pulled me tighter to him. You should get some sleep. I'll put Nessie in her, but where's Andrew? He whispered. Bed was all I said as I stumbled up the stairs and collapsed onto the double bed. This time, it was the sun that woke me. I rolled over, my back to the light, and faced my mate, still sleeping. His peaceful face made me smile and forget what had happened last night. I got out of bed and got dressed into long black shorts with a plum-colored t-shirt. I put on a gray cardigan as I went downstairs. It was quiet. I was the only one awake, so I decided to make breakfast. I went to the fridge for the eggs but realized we used all of them up. What's a breakfast without eggs? I sighed and went to the front door, putting on my trainers and coat. I left a note for Edward saying I'm going to the groceries shop. I walked to the garage and took the little car, a blue Ford Focus. I pulled out of the driveway and drove to the nearest groceries shop. I found one, Walmart. I parked in a space and went straight to the dairy section and got some eggs. I heard my name being called, so I turned around. I grinned happily. Esm. I put my eggs down and hugged her. What are you doing here? I thought you don't eat human food, I whispered, eyeing the basket of food she had in one hand. She just smiled. For the homeless people, dear. I think I'm going to follow this recipe book I found ad about on TV, a cooking channel. I smiled widely. Me too. I was watching some cooking channels yesterday. The kids are complaining that they want Chinese for dinner instead of elk every day. I rolled my eyes as Esm laughed. We exited after we paid for the food, still chatting. You should come over someday, Esm. We could make our own recipe for those kids you were talking about. I grinned. You won't have to worry about the smell. We could do it outside, or I would have to open the windows and doors. But the kids would be cold out, won't they? Esm put her hand on my shoulder and smiled. Yes. We should arrange a get-together soon. She frowned. Did Edward tell you about? I nodded quickly, my smile fading. I'm scared, Esm. I've never been this scared before. My eyes watered and I looked away, wiping my eyes before it showed. I felt Esm give me a motherly hug. She kissed my cheek. Don't worry about it, your family will be safe. I talked to Carlisle. He's going to contact the wolves, to make them worry as well. You don't know, they could help us out. You never know. She winked and bid me goodbye as she went back to her car and drove away. I got home and parked the car. Going back into the house, Edward was waiting for me. He smiled brilliantly and hugged me. Good morning, love, he smiled. I smiled back and kissed him. Morning. Now move so I can get your breakfast ready. I smirked at him and moved to the kitchen. Mimi. Andrew yelled, hugging my legs. I laughed as I put down the eggs and ruffled his curly hair. Morning, sweetie, I greeted him. He growled playfully. I'm not a sweetie, Mommy. I am Tiger, Roar. He jumped up and showed his hands as claws, running around me. A tail appeared behind him and he suddenly shifted into a baby tiger cub. He ran and slipped on the smooth floor, drifting as if he was on ice. I laughed and shifted into a tiger. I took Andy into my mouth and carried him outside to the meadow where he played around chasing grasshoppers. Edward came out then. He changed into a tiger and played with Andy as I changed back and continued making breakfast. What for breakfast, Mummy? I heard a child voice outside the kitchen arch door. I turned to see Nessie still in her long PJ nightgown rubbing her eyes. Her hand clutched her toy rabbit she called Lapina. I smiled. "Pancakes, honey, do you want to help mommy?" I asked her as I poured some pancake mix into the frying pan. Renesmee's eyes brightened and she nodded excitedly. I helped her put on her cooking apron and chef it which nearly went over her eyes. She put down Lapina on the kitchen breakfast table and climbed up on the stool I gave her. "First, could you help crack these eggs and put the gooey stuff in that bowl?" I told her, giving her a fork to help her. She grinned and squealed as the egg split open and the gooey stuff flowed into the bowl. "We eat that?" she asked in distaste, scrunching her nose up as to rid of the smell of uncooked eggs. I laughed at her comical expression. "It isn't cooked yet, sweetie," I told her as we made more pancake mix. In a few minutes we managed to get white flour all over ourselves. "Is it done yet, Mummy?" Renesmee asked, standing on tiptoes to see if the pancakes were cooked yet. "Last one," I murmured as I flipped it onto the plate where a pile of pancakes were already made. "Done." I grinned at her work and set the plate on the breakfast table. Nessie grinned hungrily at the food and looked up at me, as if asking permission to take the first one. I smiled and handed her the golden syrup. She squirted it all over the plate and handed it back to me grinning like a Cheshire cat. She was about to take one but I stopped her. "Nuh-uh. Change your clothes first, and then eat," she pouted. "But Mummy, Andy will eat all of them before I do," she cried. "No he won't, Andy's outside and might need a wash before he comes anywhere the pancakes." I told her. This seemed to relax her and she grinned, hugging my leg before grabbing Lapina and racing upstairs to the bathroom. I chuckled at how competitive they were as I watched Andy and Edward play in the garden. CPOV. I shifted my weight onto my right foot as I waited just outside the treaty line. Jasper and Emmett were with me, trying to keep the peace they claimed, but I knew that Emmett was only anticipating for a duel. "Are you sure they'll come?" Emmett asked. He and Jasper were as still as stone, their eyes raked across the fern relentlessly. "I'm sure," I reassured him, sniffing the air, trying to get their scents. There was a strong odor that made my nose burn in disgust. They were here. Let us hope that they will change back to their normal forms, I thought as 6 wolves appeared from the bushes. "Hello, we're here to inform you about tomorrow." I looked at the black wolf. "Can you change back to your human form so we can talk?" I requested. The red and brownish one next to it snorted. The black wolf growled. It didn't look like they were going anywhere anytime soon. I gritted my teeth. "If you're looking for a translator you could have just asked, you know," Edward said suddenly at my side. He grinned at me as he shifted into a huge brown wolf. "Where's B?" I started but stopped as I saw a female elk trot up to us. It bleated before it changed back into Bella. She went to stand behind me. "Hey Dad," she greeted me warmly, hugging me. I heard the wolves make a disgusted sound before Edward growled at them. Bella smiled and nodded at me. I could speak now. I squared my shoulders and looked directly at the wolves in a line, making eye contact with everyone. "We have had some news recently that a coven of vampires are coming to Forks." I paused, waiting for the growls to subside. "We do not have a clear idea to why, but we do know that they have no knowledge of the treaty and which land they are forbidden to. However, this coven is highly regarded to us as royalty. They make the rules so we have no power over them. They are known as Volturi. They are not like us. They feed on human blood." Edward shivered. He looked at Seth, quietly communicating with him. "They asked if you were going to allow them to stay," Bella whispered. I shook my head. "I do not wish for them to stay. They had bring nothing but grief and pain for our family. That was why I wanted to warn you. There could be a fight on our hands, a fight that might be the death of all of us. You may or may not help us. It is your choice, but this coven will be interested in the wolf shifters. And just like what they did to the purebred shifters, they will force you to submission or kill you." One of the wolves snapped at me fiercely, but Edward rose up from the ground and snarled at him, forcing him to back down. I looked on warily, instinct preparing myself for a fight. "When will they come?" Bella broke off, glaring at the wolf that had translated through her mate. "Tomorrow we will be ready." "I hope so." I turned around and sprinted back home, the others trailing behind. BPOV. "Mummy, are we going to meet the vampire people now?" Andrew asked, his voice muffled by the coat he and Renesmee were wearing. I looked straight ahead. I couldn't bear to see their faces, their confused, innocent faces. They were coming today, Alice said they would. The plan was that we would meet them halfway the baseball field. I was at the Cullens house still, getting Andrew and Renesmee dressed into their coats and warm clothes. I stood up and hugged my arms, my eyes pricked as silent tears ran down my cheeks. I sensed Edward behind me. He wrapped his arms from behind my waist and took me to his chest. I leaned back onto him and relaxed. We have to leave now, love, his breath caressing my neck gently. I looked at Renesmee and Andrew waiting patiently at the door. A lump formed in my throat. Why do we have to take them with us? They don't deserve this. It isn't fair. I protested. Nothing is ever fair. It doesn't make sense. I know. 10 minutes later we were all waiting. Edward was in front of Andy and Nessie. The Cullens were waiting next to us, the wolves far back, probably just watching. I squeezed Edward's hand, he squeezed back. I looked on forward, my eyes seeing beyond the forests and deep into undergrowths and bushes. It was then I sensed them. I tensed. Preparing myself physically, everyone else who noticed me tensed up as well. It was a few seconds before they came. They arrived with such beauty. In such a tight synchronization, all with cloaks from shades from pitch black to light gray. I immediately looked at their eyes, scanning through which one might be Roland. I rested on the one with light blue eyes. When it looked up I shivered and looked away. They suddenly stopped, not far from us but close enough to hear our quietest mutter, "What now?" I thought to my mate. He looked at Carlyle, nodding tightly. Carlyle stepped forward, his eyes were guarded and his expression calm. "My friends, may I ask why you came to see us?" "We have committed no crimes and we follow the rules you make." A cloaked figure stepped forward, he let down his hood and I hissed. I tried pull Edward back but he resisted, squeezing my hand, preventing me from running away. I whimpered, "We have no intention to fight, my good friends. We have come to see your new addition to this coven. You see, I heard rumors that you have taken in purebreeds." He looked straight at Edward, his eyes raked over him to me and then to our children. I snarled, "A family, actually." He smiled. Carlyle looked anxiously at us before speaking again. "They needed a place to stay, that was all, and now everything is settled." He almost pleaded. Aro's smile faded. "Do you know that these two have run away from me? Do you not? They had belonged to me and now they have run away to here." He looked around in distaste. "They do not belong to you, Carlyle, they belong to me, and having you think they are yours is in my case, stealing. Will never join your guard, monster." I hissed menacingly. He looked at me with amusement. "I didn't expect you to agree with me, Isabella." He smiled. A guard stepped forward. It let down its hood to show long brown hair that was pulled back to a ponytail. "Roland," Edward whispered. Roland smiled and walked up to us. He stopped just half a meter away from Edward. "Edward, my old friend. How is Amber? Is she well? I never heard of her for quite a time." "Why is that?" He moved his head to the side, a small smirk appearing on his face. "HMMO, yeah, I remember, 'cause I was taken and shut it into a crab about it." He was nearly shouting, his brows creased together in a frown. "You were there too." "Didn't see her anywhere though," he pointed at me. "Yuck no, with all my time being away from all you freaks I realized I hate you all. Simply put, I hate all you people who didn't do a damn thing while I was hurting. I was hurting and all you did was sit there and stare. We are the same." "You can't say that." Edward shouted. "No, we're not. We're not the same, not even the same race. It's into two groups, Edward, the mice and the birds." He separated them with his two hands. "The birds are the ones who are special. They rise above everything and anything, don't take no shit from anyone, anything. I'm a bird." He gestured to his cloak. "The mice are the ones who stay in the dark corners, they just sit and stare, just like what you and Amber did to me." He grimaced. "They sit and watch the birds get tortured, right? And they don't help. If we did then we'd be killed." Edward shouted, stepping forward into Roland's face. He snorted. "Yeah, right, even if you wouldn't have died you wouldn't bother to help," he accused bitterly. "Guess who's the mouse?" I glared at this man. He was obviously messed up in the head. I wondered briefly why he didn't already start a fight with my mate yet. Then why are you here? The people who done all those horrible things you were talking about are right there, look. Edward pointed behind him to the Volturi guard. I swore I saw Aro's eyes flash a brighter red. Roland faltered. He opened his mouth, but closed it again. He glared at Edward for a second and looked at the Cullens, and now, here you are standing behind the creatures you once would rather die a slow painful death than rather encounter. He narrowed his eyes. Edward shook his head slowly. It isn't what it looks like, and they're different. I was only disgusted because of the diet of human blood. They don't. Your party, however, do. He pointed out. Aro suddenly hissed from the line, it's a trick, Roland. It's all a mind game, you know they have powers. Kill him, kill the traitor now. I suddenly turned around as Renesmee started tugging on my leg. Kill who, Mummy? She asked, her voice shaking a bit as she stared behind me. I faced her and spoke, Sweetie, don't list. I fell forward, a blinding pain in my head as I stumbled and fell headfirst to the ground, passing out. EPOV. Bella turned back to talk to Nessie. She was obviously worried. I looked at Carlisle. He nodded but suddenly opened his mouth to warn me of something. I turned back before he could get a word out and saw Roland's fist colliding with my wife's head. I grabbed his arm but it was too late. My love fell forward, SM and Rosalie catching her before she hit the ground. I saw red. My other fist moving forward to punch him the face. I succeeded, but he swept his leg between mine to put me off balance. I leaned forward and he threw me forward. I stumbled away from the protection of my family. He came at me again, but I was faster. I turned to the side and stalked back. He seemed to like the challenge and flexed his neck before shifting into a dark leopard. I shifted into a slick cheetah, growling at the person who attacked my wife. Traitor! He screamed in my head. My tail flicked in irritation. I'm not a traitor. You're yelling at me while you should really be yelling at him. I looked at Aro purposely. Roland looked at Aro for a second before I felt his mind change. His thoughts were forced and controlled. Much like when Bella first encountered the Cullen house. Jasper had said he was curious to who was outside, so his emotions were put across to Bella. He apologized though, but who could be controlling him? I thought by myself. My brain racked for a moment before I suddenly realized it was one of the guards. Flashback. Who killed them, Edward? Who killed them? Aro's voice echoed in the deadly room. All what I could think of was me killing them. It was me, wasn't it? However, I was forced to mutter, yes, it was me. I killed them. I killed them, didn't I? Thank you. Your gift came in well. Your gift came in well. I jumped out of the way just in time as Roland attacked me. Wake up. Roland growled at me. I looked at him, coming back from my daydream. What? You're supposed to fight, am I? Grrrrrr. Roland stalked forward. I looked up. And then I shifted. MPOV. Why wasn't my brother fighting? Roland's gonna eat him and he's just sitting there with some dazed look in his animal eyes. I was going to call to him to start fighting already, but he suddenly changed again. What the hell? I muttered at the ginger cat. It meowed and started moving towards the guard. Edward the cat moved stealthily in and out of the vampires. It stopped at one and disappeared. What in the daddy? Little Andy suddenly squealed and raced towards the guard. Andy. Alice's shrill voice panicked. She grabbed at him but her hand took in air. He vanished. Carlisle looked confused and slightly terrified. We scanned the area for Edward or Andy but they were nowhere to be seen. What the fuck? I blurted out. EPOV. Okay son, when I touch here, try to imagine a big forest fire in the summer, okay? I whispered. I knew Andy were keeping us invisible. I needed him to help me with this. I can only lift the guard in the air while Andy burns his brain. It was dirty work but I needed to do this for Roland to stop acting like a madman. And I needed to kill this vampire for that to happen. I needed to save my family. Ready? Here, remember? I pointed to the guard's head. Andrew smiled his dimples and nodded. He stared at the head, imagining a huge forest fire. Right inside the brain. I touched its head. The second Andy closed his eyes the guard began to scream in pain. I saw his marble skin start to tighten and shake, the way normal glass reacts before it shatters. I scooped Andy up and sprinted to my family. I shielded him as the glass skin broke and a rain of it pierced my back. I winced but kept on running. Reappear now, son. Let me see you. I told him telepathically. CPOV. The man's scream sent a shiver of fear down my spine. I frantically looked at what could be the source of the pain. Nothing. He exploded. The glass went everywhere. We shielded Bella and released me by the compact. I saw the dark leopard in the middle yelp as some glass shards got him. It shuddered and shook out its short fur. Carlisle. Esm called out to me. I looked at where she was pointing and saw Edward reappearing with Andy in his arms. He was running towards us, his eyes were shut in pain. Rosalie ran up and took Andy from his arms as he stumbled and kneeled over, his arms flying to his back. Son. I kneeled in front of him. He nodded sharply. God, my back hurts as hell. He moaned. I inspected his back. It was scratched and a couple of thick marble vampire skin was dug into his skin. I grimaced and took him away. Where's Bella? He groaned in pain, his eyes scanning the ground before he rested on his wife. RPOV. No, no. Not again. He can't outsmart me. Not again, not this time. I looked at Roland. His mind was free from the influencer, so he was confused and weary. He isn't any use to me anymore. I growled and stalked up to him. He noticed me and his eyes grew wide with fear. No, 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 he muttered. Back in his human form he crawled back slowly. Yes, 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 Roland. I put my hand to his neck and hit it down. Snap! His dead form fell from my hands to the ground. Satisfied, I turned to Jane. I looked at her and inclined my head to the Cullens line. She nodded sweetly and turned her gaze to them. Revenge, I thought, with a vengeance mind. BPOV. I was in darkness. I couldn't tell for how long, but I was alone. I figured that out myself. And dark. I squinted through the darkness. There seemed to be a light. It got brighter and brighter until I heard an angel calling my name. Bella. I smiled at the familiarity of it. Love. Wake up please, Edward's voice. Definitely. I reached towards it blindly, just hearing, wake up Bella, please love, please wake up. I opened my eyes to see my love hovering over my face with concern. I smiled softly, but frowned as his face contorted in pain. Oh, Emmett. That hurt worse than the others. He groaned, still looking at me. I started to get up. My head throbbed in a dull pain. I remember talking to Nessie and then, nothing. What happened? I demanded, looking at Edward's wounds. Emmett snorted. Your husband here pulled a superhero and killed a guard. Something about a mind-controlling gift that made that retarded dude there so retarded. He explained honestly. I blinked. Andy helped too, Edward added. What? I cried. He wasn't injured. You let him near the guard? I asked. Little bugger vanished before Alice could get him, Emmett whistled. I sighed. I can't believe you, Bella. Alice yelled. Shield now. I jumped up. Automatically my bubble protector expanded and covered the whole line. We were safe, yet again. I grinned at Jane as she screamed in frustration. What now? I whispered to my comrades. All of Aro's mental attacks had failed. I was too strong and they knew it. I'm trying to prevent a fight, friend. Aro called out to Carlisle. He looked at me with need and I bared my teeth. More like trying to stimulate one, I thought bitterly. Then stop trying, Aro, Carlisle requested. Edward folded his arms across his chest and leaned back to whisper in my ear. He's going to try something. Roland death didn't work, so he's trying a new method. I can see it in his eyes. It's obvious. I frowned at the Volturi. Something new? What method was he going to use? I must have said that thought out loud because my husband looked down at me with a pained look in his eye. I won't repeat myself again, Carlisle. I want her. He looked at me and smiled evilly. I gasped and glanced at my mate, terrified. His new method, Edward suddenly growled, loud. He glared at Aro, as in daring him to make the next move. I became overly self-conscious of our children behind us. I do not own them, Aro. They have the right to speak for themselves. You see the wolves behind us? We do not own them like sick puppies. They have their own right to be here and not to be here. You need to understand, my friend, is that power does not come in owning power. It comes when it wants to be. You can't force it, because then you'll never find happiness. Carlisle looked at his mate and took her hand, emphasizing his point. Aro looked at me, unfazed, still determination like a fire in his eyes. I'm sorry, my friend. He turned to look at Carlisle. I had something that was mine. She was a real beauty, you know. A prize. I had won it, so it belongs to me. Two gifted, useful purebreeds. That it seems, he peered behind me, that it seems that out of that equation has two purebred offspring. He smiled at Renasme. She cowered behind me, hugging my legs with her life. I snarled warningly, my mothering instincts taking over, and I crouched, ready to shift, or pounce if needed. How many times I told you, Aro, I don't want to be part of the Volturi. My mate said firmly, but in the corner of my mind I saw his hand curl into a fist. Fine, Aro said simply, but I wonder. I snarled. I could see red. You can try. I thought his rage took hold of me. You can just try to take me. See how that works out, huh? You can try, Aro. I spat. You're not getting anywhere near my children. I all but screamed at him. I stalked forward, ignoring Edward's protesting. Aro looked at me, slightly surprised. As he was expecting me to break down and cry. As if. I growled angrily, Bella. Edward hissed in my head, what are you doing? I looked back at him and saw his face etched with worry and anger. Defending my family, I thought simply. He growled quietly, you're not doing it alone. He started to walk forward, but I stopped him. I'll call you if I do, okay? I thought, assuring him. He stopped and nodded, this only taking a second. I turned back to Aro and bared my teeth. Challenging was natural, a gut instinct. Edward and I had to warn off certain animals when we trekked through the forest, shifting. Just like if any male went into the territory, Edward would, as magnificent as he already was, stand tall and challenge it. It was funny sometimes when an animal thought it could win against him. Aro didn't move, but one of the guards floated forward. He was big and even burlier than Emmett. This didn't faze me and I stood my ground. It would have looked kind of a one-sided battle looking at my small height compared to an indestructible, but flammable, vampire. He pounced. I quickly sidestepped him and kicked his back, and he fell forward but reclaimed his balance and came at me again. I quickly realized that he trusted his strength and power to win. I ducked when he swung a punch and kicked his genitals. He winced and I quickly phased into a panther and bit the back of his arm. I pulled and heard a cracking and splintering sound as his arm tore off. I threw it over my back and ran the other way as he flipped to land on my leg. It was harder for him to land punches because I was half his height when I was on all fours. I jumped nimbly out of the way when he tried to kick me. I jumped on his back and growled loudly, biting his neck and pulling, tearing. He struck me. His head turned my way and bit me on my foreleg. I felt his fangs pierce my skin and I howled in pain. I grasped my arm as I shifted back to my human form. Now! I yelled through the pain. The burn of the venom was so excruciating I couldn't help but cry out. I saw the vampire tower over me before he landed a hard kick on my leg. I didn't feel the pain until after I screamed. He came at me again but was thrown down by Edward. My mate stalked him and jumped back when the vampire attacked. He ran at him, sidestepping as he struck a blow to the vampire's back. He was reaching for the head but took a blow to his side. He grunted and stepped back. Hot tears were streaming down my face. I looked desperately to where my family was. They were torn between helping or protecting my babies. I groaned, shutting my eyes. Edward, I moaned. He looked back quickly, still in a fight, so he had to duck and roll several times. The wolves, I thought to him. I closed my eyes and thought of being a wolf, a she-wolf. I trembled slightly, and when I opened my eyes I was still lying down on the grass. I picked my muzzle off from the ground and called for the pack at the edge of the field. Help! Why? God damn it, please, we're cousins. We need to help them. Shut up, Seth. But Jake, we can't just sit here and pretend that nothing is going on. We could. Let the bloodsuckers kill each other. I'm not a bloodsucker. Jacob, please don't think for yourself for a change. Sam shot. Edward barely missed a blow to his head. Sam sighed. Fine, guys, Come on, I sighed in relief as I heard the wolves approaching. Edward's opponent quickly looked the direction. My mate took this advantage and slipped behind him. He had shifted into a wolf as well, so he bit down on his neck and yanked. A slow, tearing metallic sound echoed through the field on both sides. I looked as soon as the vampire's body fell to the ground, twitching. Edward, still holding the disassembled head, walked up to me before we both shifted to our human forms. Bella. He dropped the head and looked at my wound. The venom was replacing my normal blood quickly and painfully. I moaned and struggled as Edward took something from his pocket. It was like those kind of potion bottles you get in movies, like Romeo and Juliet, when he buys that liquid to kill himself by his wife's side. Calm down, love, my husband whispered. He unscrewed the container and put a few drops on the wound. It stung a lot, but the pain quickly faded and I felt the venom being quickly cooled away until it disappeared from my blood system. The cup sealed up slowly until all what was left was a faint pink line on my arm. Antidote, Edward told me as he put it back into his pocket. I exhaled. We won? I thought, but Edward shook his head. The wolves were growling and snapping at the Volturi. The Cullens were shouting and yelling at Aro and the guard. I spotted my children hiding behind a bush, shifted to cheetah cubs. You can try, but you can't win, I thought as I turned back to look at the guard. They were so close. It was only a matter of time before it started. Did you burn the body? I asked Edward as he checked my broken leg. He shook his head and cursed at his forgetfulness. Do it, now, I ordered him, pushing him away, my eyes glued to the twitching head near me. Edward took out a lighter and set fire to the body, throwing the head in. A large purple smoke rose up into the air. It stank as rotting meat and chemicals. I stood. My leg felt pretty healed. We were fast at recovery. Edward and I ran to the fight just as it was starting. CPOV. I watched as Emmett attacked a close guard. They started fighting and then everyone started joining in. I helped as them tear the head off one by holding their arms. I couldn't see Aura or Chaos. I was too into the fight to search for them. I didn't want it to turn out like this. Fighting was always at the bottom of my how to work problems out list. I turned and punched one of the guards as it pinned down my mate. Says POV. You, that was so gross. I snorted as I saw a vampire headless, still moving on the ground. Vamps fight dirty. We fight even dirtier, Embry thought. Get some, baby. Quill shouted as he jumped onto a vampire's back. Seth, watch out. Jake warned me as a vampire snuck up behind me. Jake jumped and tackled it, sending it rolling. It stopped moving as Jake and Quill tore it to pieces. Where are Edward and Bella? I thought curiously. I dunno, Embry thought. Why do you care anyway, Seth? Jake growled at me. I was just worried. There are only relatives that aren't dead. Yeah, and they live with vampires. He shot back. Stop it now. Sam's alpha voice silenced us. EPOV. Aro. I growled as I saw him move away from the fight to the bushes. He turned my way and snarled. I shifted into a panther as he came at me and jumped at him. We both rolled on the grass, snapping and roaring at each other. I dodged his hands as they moved to snake my neck. I threw him off me and rolled to the side as he jumped and punched the ground where I was a second ago. I shifted to an eagle and flew up. He was looking for me. I scanned the fight with my vision. We were winning. I quickly phased to my human form, still in the sky. I heard my family scream as I fell, but I quickly made a head dive to the ground. My hair flew back against my head. I spotted Aro sprinting towards me. I yelled a war cry and phased into an eagle again. I flew back up, nimbly dodging Aro's face. I saw Bella fighting a vampire. She quickly tore its head off and looked up as I flew past. She grinned and raised her fist, giving her own war cry. I looped and came back at Aro again, phasing into my human form as I jumped on his back. I took his head on my hands and yanked as hard as I could. A guy grunted as I fell onto my back. Somebody grabbed my waist and threw me off him. I rolled, but the person clutched my legs and dragged me on the grass. I struggled, but the hold was too strong. Damn it, Edward. Bella screamed in my head. I looked to my right and saw she was in the same position. I yelled in fury and kicked my legs at the person who grabbed me. Tie them up, Alex, Aro commanded the vampire. Yes, master. He came at us and leaned over me. I spat in his face and he growled, punching me. I blacked out. CPOV. I couldn't find Edward or Bella anywhere. I quickly helped SM kill another vampire and took her hand. I can't find them. I told her. You sure they aren't? She trailed off. I shook my head. No, they couldn't be. Suddenly a piercing voice echoed through the field. Stop. We looked up to see Aro coming through the bushes. 2 of his guards came out, and they held 2 people in their arms. Bella, Edward. I hissed but stayed where I was. They were dead. I could hear their fast hearts fluttering like a mockingbird's. Aro had tied them up. 2 pits of fire were made in the middle of the field. My heart clenched. Carlisle's trembled. I squeezed her hand. No, Aro, don't tell me you will. Stop fighting, Carlisle. Aro warned me. Or your price will be paid. I do not wish to do this, but she gave me no choice. He tied Bella to the pole near the fire, her hands behind her back. He done the same to Edward as well. They were both unconscious. I heard SM cry out, Aro, you bastard. Give my children back. She yelled, taking a step forward. He smiled sadly, though it was all faked, and shook his head. My apologies, my friends. You won't give them to me so no one can have them. That's the way it goes. He explained as though it was the most obvious thing in the world. I heard a scream and a baby growl. 2 other of the guard came forward, holding Andy and Renesmee. They were in their human forms, both struggling and crying. No. Rosalie yelled from behind me. Emmett was trying to hold her back. If we attacked, Aro would just kill them all. Calm, friends. I won't hurt them. They should be allowed to watch their parents burn, shouldn't they? Aro looked at the 2 toddlers with fascination. Hello, little ones. Do you want to see your daddy and mommy? He cooed, walking up to them and crouching to their height. Andrew threw a rock at his face, not with his hands though but with his ability to control the elements. Aro didn't even flinch. Fine, he murmured. Alex moved behind Edward and placed his unconscious face closer to the fire pit. I saw his hands move before he opened his eyes in shock. My son's eyes widened and he struggled violently against the rope holding him. He looked at his children's terrified faces, not believing this was happening. Goddamn you, Aro. He yelled, still struggling. You should be thanking me, Edward. Aro laughed, despite the situation. I saved you that day. You could have been arrested, taken to jail if it weren't for me. I brought you in when you had no place to go. You killed your family, Edward. You murdered them with your own hands. I know, I saw it myself, I gasped. He didn't tell us about his whole experience of his first phase. He wasn't a murderer, I didn't do it. He yelled to no one. He started shaking and I saw his eyes water. Yes, you did. You killed them, Aro, my whole family and my friends just so you could have a reason to take me. He said bitterly. Aro narrowed his eyes. Do you want your children to watch their father die? He hissed, taking Edward's pole. He thrust it forward till Edward's whole body was in the fire. I yelled and gritted my teeth as Edward's body struggled violently. I couldn't hear his screams. He was trying to hold them in. Aro. Please stop. I fell to my knees. I couldn't believe I called that man my friend. Daddy. Renesmee screamed. She was covering her eyes with her hands. Stop. My family growled behind me. SM was crying. Aro pulled Edward out and tossed him to the ground. He wasn't moving. My eyes pricked me, son. Bella screamed out then. I didn't realize she was awake until she struggled and cried against her pole. Don't hurt him. She screamed as Aro bent over Edward's body. He cocked his head to the side. He isn't dead, was all he said as he untied Edward's rope. I could never kill him. Bella stared at her mate. She was still crying as she stared at the fire still cackling dangerously close to her face. Aro went behind her. I thought he was going to do the same thing to Bella. He just untied the ropes and she fell forward into the fire. No, I didn't see her get up. BPOV. The fire burnt at my face and arms. I didn't pay attention to it. I phased. Suddenly, there was no pain. I couldn't feel myself being burned alive. I flew up. My orange wings took me out of the fire and I flew straight into Alex's shocked face. He screamed as the fire burned his face. I squawked at him and tore his head off with my large beak. I flapped my wings and turned to Aro. He looked wide-eyed at me. Bella. I looked at Edward. The burn marks were gone, but he still had a nasty burn mark near his eye. Distract him, he told me, his face still down on the grass. He was faking it. I flapped my wings again and squawked as loud as I could. I suddenly shifted again, to a replica of a vampire. Aro knew exactly who she was. Sulpisha? He whispered, taking a step forward. I held her hand up. That was my hand. You killed me, Aro, I said, taking a step back into the fire. He fell to his knees as the fire licked the back of my leg. This is my revenge now, Aro, I whispered, taking a step back into the fire. He screamed and pulled at his black hair. I'm sorry, he muttered, his pain-filled eyes looking at me with so much emotion. I faced back into the firebird and flew to where Edward was now crouched. Aro was still on his knees. I knew that copying his dead mate would break him. Edward stood. He nodded at Carlisle and walked to where Aro was. He took Aro to his chest and soothed him. Aro was still shaking. My mate was calming him down like he was a child. He patted his hair, his hood down. He rocked him like he would do to a baby. He leant down and whispered, "Thank you." His hand slowly went up to his head. He twisted and quickly tore it off. Aro's corpse slumped over him. I shifted back to my human form and helped him put Aro's body in the fire. I looked back at my extended family and saw them coming to us. Esm ran and took Edward and I to her arms. We hugged her back. Daddy, Mummy, our children ran at us and we scooped them up and held them to our chest. A wolf trotted up and faced back and Seth hugged Edward and I. That was some serious stuff. I'm glad you two are alright, he sighed. I looked at Carlisle's face and held back a giggle. Questions later, let's go back home, I requested. The wolves were eager to burn the dead bodies. We let them. It's what wolves are for, was it not? That's it for today. See you in the next video. Bye. The end.